Welcome to a gentle journey through time. If you're here to unwind, rest your thoughts, and gently fall asleep, you're in the right place. Take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and allow yourself to melt into stillness. Tonight, you'll be traveling through the slow, quiet hours of ancient Rome, not through the chaos of emperors and battles, but through the soft and sleepy life of a woman named Livia, a midwife in a dusty seaside town. Before we begin, if this peaceful storytelling brings you calm, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and sharing it with someone who may need a good night's sleep. Your support helps keep this soft storytelling alive. Now lie back, loosen your jaw, let your eyes soften. You're standing at the edge of the 2nd century. Let the world of Rome unfold slowly in your mind. The day began not with a shout, nor with rushing feet, but with the slow creak of a wooden cot and the scratch of straw beneath an old woolen blanket. Livia, midwife of Ostia, awoke just as the faint gray light of early morning peeked through the clay-framed window of her modest home. The room was quiet, save for the distant, sleepy coo of a pigeon and the soft crackle of cooling embers in the hearth. She blinked once, then again. The sleep still lingered behind her eyes, reluctant to let go. The fig she hadn't eaten the night before still sat in the corner on a wooden dish, slightly wrinkled now. She saw it, thought about it, decided to leave it there. With a long breath, she sat up, her joints making their usual gentle protest. She slipped into her plain linen tunic, tied at the waist with a soft, faded wool cord. Her sandals, worn from years of use, welcomed her feet like familiar old friends. One strap twisted, as it always did. She untwisted it. It twisted again. She left it. Crossing the room, she knelt by the hearth and stirred the remnants of last night's fire. A puff of ash lifted into the air as she poked the embers with a bronze poker. No flame. She added 2 twigs, waited. A small curl of smoke rose. She placed a split olive wood stick on top, watched it catch slowly and lazily, and let the flame flicker to life. With a sigh, she set a pot of water over the fire and settled down to wait. Breakfast was not a feast, just a spoonful of cooled barley porridge and half a dried date. She chewed slowly, as if time didn't mind. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the curtain. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crowed, but without enthusiasm. The city of Ostia had not yet woken. The fishmongers were silent. The amphorae are still sealed, and the usual clatter of sandals on stone had yet to begin. Livia took up her basket, her tools of the trade nestled inside with care and simplicity. A bronze birthing spoon polished to a dull shine, a cloth soaked gently in vinegar, a vial of olive oil slightly cloudy, a length of clean thread, a small, blunt knife wrapped in linen, a sprig of rue, 2 carved amulets, more symbolic than useful, nothing more, nothing less. Then, a knock, soft, 2 short taps, a pause, 1 more. She knew the rhythm. It was the neighbor boy, perhaps 10 years old, with sleepy eyes and dusty cheeks. "My aunt," he mumbled. "She says there's a feeling. Maybe something. Soon, or maybe tomorrow." Livia nodded without speaking, closed her door gently, and followed him through the winding, sun-warmed alleys of Ostia. The streets were still half asleep. A donkey passed by, pulling a cart with 1 creaky wheel. A merchant yawned as he opened the shutters of his shop, letting in the weak morning sun. A cat stretched on a low wall, tail twitching once before curling back into a ball. There was no rush, no panic, just the slow unfolding of a Roman morning. The aunt's house was modest, its doorway wide and open to the breeze. Inside, the room was dim and cool. She lay on a mat stuffed with straw, her expression neutral, not in pain, not at peace, just waiting. Livia set her basket down without ceremony, knelt beside her, and gently rested a hand on the woman's belly. It was soft and quiet. The child within made no fuss. Perhaps it would be tonight, perhaps tomorrow. These things could not be rushed. They sat together in silence for a while. The shadows in the room shifted with the movement of the sun outside. In a nearby room, someone coughed. A fly buzzed lazily in a circle. From the courtyard, the faint splash of a jug being filled could be heard. The minutes melted. There was no need to talk. There was no emergency. Just waiting. Around the 9th hour, the woman declared she felt better. Maybe the baby is sleeping. Again, she said. Or maybe it was nothing. Livia nodded once. She packed her tools without fuss. Come back tomorrow, the aunt added, as if Livia hadn't already decided to. As she stepped back into the street, the light had changed. An afternoon had settled over the city like a thin wool blanket warm, a little heavy, a little quiet. Children played in the dust with round stones. A woman rinsed vegetables in a basin. Somewhere, someone spilled a little oil, and the scent lingered in the breeze. Livia walked home the same way she had come, slowly, without intention to hurry. A chicken crossed the road in front of her, paused, looked around, and sat down on a cracked tile. Nothing more, nothing less. She watched it for a moment before, continuing. Back in her room, the shadows stretched long and lazy across the floor. The fig was still there. It had shriveled slightly more. She thought about eating it, decided again not to. She placed her basket down, unfastened her tunic, and lay back onto the cot. The ceiling above held a single spider, weaving a new thread. One strand, then another, then stillness. Livia closed her eyes and listened to the quiet. Outside, the pigeons cooed again. A faint scent of fish sauce drifted in from the harbor. A jug dripped slowly in the corner, one drop at a time. The world had moved very little since she'd woken, and that was just how she liked it. And so the day ended. Nothing much had happened. And yet, everything had passed, as it always did, in its slow, ancient rhythm. Sleep well. The day after the quiet, unremarkable visit to the neighbor's aunt began in much the same way as all others in Livia's life. There were no sudden changes. No shouts from the street, no Roman soldiers thundering past on horses, and no divine omens in the sky. The world rose slowly, as it always did, wrapped in a thin mist that clung to the corners of the roof tiles and drifted lazily through the narrow streets of Ostia. The old wooden door creaked slightly as it shifted in the early morning breeze. But Livia remained in her cot for a moment longer, her eyes half open, watching a faint thread of light stretch across the wall. In the stillness, the only sound was the quiet sigh of wind through the shutters, and the occasional echo of a cartwheel rolling far in the distance. She shifted under her thin blanket, feeling the scratch of the linen against her arms, and slowly sat up. The room was cool. Her breath formed a faint cloud in the morning chill, and she wrapped her shawl tighter across her shoulders as she stood. Her feet found her sandals on instinct, the same strap twisted. She corrected it again, knowing it would twist once more before the morning was done. A small bronze mirror on the wall caught a glimmer of light. She looked into it briefly, seeing a face she knew intimately. Weathered, but not old. Quiet, but not fragile. A face that had seen births and deaths, calm evenings and chaotic nights. There was no time to reflect deeply. The water pot needed to be filled. She stepped to the hearth. The embers from the night before had cooled nearly to ash. She stirred them gently, not expecting much. A single tiny coal glowed from beneath the ash, holding on. She added some straw and breathed on it, softly, The fire grew, reluctantly but obediently. Soon, water in a clay pot began to warm over the flame, and she added a few crushed herbs, not for energy, not for stimulation, but for comfort. Fennel, chamomile, a touch of dried mint. She sipped slowly, the taste earthy and familiar. Outside, the sounds of the city remained subdued. A few birds called, not cheerfully, but simply as part of the rhythm of waking. There was no urgent call, no visitor at the door, but Livia still gathered her things. It was part of the ritual now. A small birthing kit she always kept ready, clean cloths. Vinegar, oil, her knife, her amulets, all were checked and placed. In the basket, she tied her shawl securely, lifted the basket, and stepped out into the street. The stone beneath her sandals still held the cool of the night, but the sun had begun its slow climb. Ostia was no bustling metropolis, but neither was it silent. The harbor, though far enough to be out of sight, sent waves of sound into the air. Creaking masts, shouted greetings, the rhythmic splash of oars, and the echo of merchants calling. Out their wares all blended into a soft background hum. Livia walked slowly past a small bakery. The smell of rising dough mingled with ash and smoke. The baker's wife nodded to her from the doorway, her arms white with flour. Livia nodded back, saying nothing. Words were not always necessary. A girl ran past with a clay cup in her hand, her sandals slapping loudly on the ground. A few pigeons scattered. A dog barked once, then gave up and returned to its nap. Livia turned a corner and saw the house again, the one she'd visited the day before. The boy was outside this time, sitting on the ground, drawing patterns in the dust with a stick. He looked up when he saw her. "She says it's stronger today," he said without emotion. "Not painful, just ... more." Livia nodded and entered the home without knocking. The same quiet room greeted her, placed a hand gently on her stomach, and felt the baby shift beneath her palm. A small movement, alive, present, but not ready. She smiled faintly, and the woman seemed to take comfort in that. They remained in the room for a long time, saying little. Occasionally, the woman would inhale sharply, close her eyes for a few seconds, then release the breath. Nothing regular, nothing urgent. Livia massaged oil into her belly with slow, deliberate motions, speaking softly, though not to. The woman, it was the rhythm of her hands and the murmured invocations that mattered more than the words themselves. Outside, the sunlight moved across the floor. A neighbor passed by, humming an old folk tune. A breeze rustled the linen curtain. By midday, the woman was resting again, her breathing even and deep. Livia stepped outside and sat on the low stone step. A jar of cool water had been left there, sweating in the heat. She poured a little into her hand, splashed her face, then leaned back against the wall. From here, she could see a fig tree stretching over the fence. One ripe fig had fallen onto the ground. A bee buzzed around it, slow and lazy. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but simply to be still. Time passed in the way it does in places where clocks do not rule. Slowly, quietly, with no particular ambition. By the 9th hour, there was more activity in the street. 2 boys chased each other with wooden sticks. A woman argued with a vendor about the weight of fish. The clatter of amphorae echoed from a passing cart. Livia returned to the woman's side, but still the labor had not begun. The signs were there, but they were whispers, not shouts. The body was preparing, stretching, shifting, but not yet calling for action. "Tonight," Livia said quietly, mostly to herself. The woman's sister arrived, bringing lentils and bread. Livia accepted a bowl and ate slowly, chewing each bite, until it vanished into memory. The food was simple, but the warmth was grounding. As the evening came, lamps were lit. The room glowed in soft amber. Shadows danced on the walls, stretching long, then shrinking back. The woman began to shift more often, adjusting her position, sometimes holding her breath. Livia took her hand. Still, the moment had not arrived. She whispered a prayer, not a grand one, not a chant from the temples, but the kind of quiet plea midwives had offered for generations. A blessing for softness, a wish for patience, a call for calm. Outside, the city dimmed. The fires in the homes flickered. The pigeons cooed from their perches. Somewhere, a child cried and was comforted. A door creaked open, then closed. Livia remained where she was, alert but not anxious. There was nothing to force, nothing to fix, only time to pass. The woman's breathing deepened again, her eyes closed. And Livia watched the moon rise above the clay rooftops, its pale light, casting a silvery sheen across the quiet town. The night would be long, and that was perfectly fine. The night settled around the home like a heavy woolen cloak, muffling even the usual sounds of Ostia's narrow streets. In the room where Livia sat, shadows danced slowly along the walls, cast by the flickering flame of a single oil lamp perched on a cracked shelf. The air was still, thick with the warm scent of crushed herbs and tallow. The labor had not yet begun in earnest, but it hovered near, like a distant tide slowly pulling closer with each hour. The expectant mother lay on her side now, wrapped in linen, a pillow pressed beneath her knees. Her face was calm-worn, yes, but steady. Livia had seen many such expressions. She had learned long ago that waiting was just as much a part of birth as pain or breath or blood. And so, she waited. She adjusted her position on the small stool, stretching one leg, then the other, her knees creaking with the motion. The basket of tools sat close by, always within reach, though it had not yet been opened tonight. There would be time for that. There was always time. The fire outside the room, in the larger hearth where food had been cooked earlier, had long gone out. A few coals still glowed beneath the ash, sending up faint spirals of smoke. The rest of the house was quiet. The woman's sister had gone to her sleeping mat, and the boy had curled up near the door like a small animal, breathing softly, limbs askew. Livia alone remained alert, not because she expected anything immediately, but because she knew how quickly stillness could become urgency. She reached into her shawl and pulled out a small cloth pouch. From it, she drew a tiny carved figure Egeria, the nymph of childbirth, guardian of secrets, whispered to by generations of Roman women in the quiet moments before dawn. The figure was no more than 3 inches tall, worn smooth from touch. And time, Livia turned it gently in her palm, her thumb tracing the familiar grooves. She did not speak aloud. There was no need. The prayers had already been said, years ago, hundreds of times. They were folded now into every thread of her shawl, into every creak of her basket lid, into every breath she took during nights like this. Outside, the city whispered. Somewhere, a nightjar called softly into the dark. A donkey brayed once, then fell silent. A breeze stirred the dry leaves of a potted fig tree. Everything felt suspended, not in fear, but in anticipation, like the young. Held breath between lightning and thunder. Livia closed her eyes briefly and let her body lean against the wall. Not asleep. Never asleep. But not quite awake either. It was the state midwives learned over time, a kind of liminal awareness, present but weightless, ready to rise at the first shift of a sigh. Time moved slowly, bending around the lamplight. At one point, the mother shifted and groaned, not in pain, but discomfort. Livia was beside her before the sound had fully faded. She adjusted the pillow, rubbed a circle into her lower back, murmured soft encouragement that was more tone than meaning. The woman sighed and turned her face toward the wall again. Livia waited. A contraction passed mild, brief, like a wave far out at sea. It was the beginning, and still there was time. The stars outside had shifted when the sister returned, yawning and wide-eyed. She brought another lamp, which she lit carefully before setting it beside the first. Its light doubled the shadows, but did not make the room any brighter. "Is it soon?" she whispered. Livia shook her head. "Not yet, but she is closer." The sister sat near the doorway, clutching a small cloth, twisting it in her hands. She would be useful later, but for now, Livia let her sit in silence. The mother groaned again, longer this time. Her hands clenched the blanket. The muscles across her abdomen pulled tight and released. Livia noted the time, though she had no hourglass, no candle with markings. She felt it, measured it in the rhythm of her breath. Soon she would begin counting, watching the spaces between. Another hour passed, then another. The contractions came now every half hour, still soft, still gentle, but growing. Livia offered the woman a sip of water mixed with honey. She drank slowly, gratefully. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Livia wiped it away with a damp cloth, her motion smooth, practiced, like the movements of someone spinning thread or grinding grain. There was no panic, no rush, only the unfolding of a process older than the city itself. The sister brought heated clothes from the hearth and placed them near the wall. The oil was unsealed. The knife was set in a bowl of boiling water. The room became a world unto itself separate, from time, from the empire, from everything beyond these four walls. It was a world of breathing, of pain, of patience. And Livia was its anchor. By the fourth hour of the night, the pain had changed. It came with more weight now, more insistence. The mother groaned through clenched teeth, shifting from side to side, pressing her palms into the mat. Her breathing turned shallow, then deep, then shallow again. Livia rubbed her shoulders, whispered gently, and watched. It was beginning in earnest. The oil lamp sputtered once and settled. The room felt warm despite the hour. The sister began heating more water. The boy stirred in his sleep, but did not wake. Outside, the city seemed to disappear. There were no carts, no footsteps, no voices. Only the occasional chirp of an insect, the soft rustle of cloth, and the sound of someone breathing through pain. Livia moved into position. She pressed her hand to the woman's belly, feeling the hardness rise and fall. Her fingers knew what her eyes could not see. They felt the movement, the descent, the readiness. The body was opening. The child was approaching. The sister came to kneel beside her, holding a cloth. Livia nodded once. The contractions were regular now, every few minutes, strong and purposeful. The woman cried out, her voice filling the room and then vanishing into the clay. Walls. She did not scream. She labored. With each push, Livia murmured encouragement. Her voice was calm, steady, like the rhythm of oars. You are strong. The child is coming. You are not alone. Her hands remained gentle but firm. She checked. For progress, guiding, waiting, and breathing with the woman. Then, a pause. A stillness between pains. The mother looked at her, eyes wide, afraid. Livia smiled softly, took her hand, and squeezed. You are close, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Very close. The next contraction brought. The head, a round shape, dark and wet, crowned for a moment, then slipped back. The sister gasped. Livia remained composed. She spoke softly, coaching the breath. Let it come. Do not rush. The next wave came, and the head emerged fully. Livia held it gently, checking the position, clearing the nose. She waited. Another breath, another contraction. The body followed, slippery and silent. Livia lifted the child. her hands cradling the neck and back. The room paused. The world held its breath. Then the cry. Small, high, sharp, and then again, louder. The mother sobbed. The sister laughed. The boy sat up, confused. Livia wrapped the child in a soft cloth and laid it against the mother's chest. The cries softened. The room slowly exhaled. It was a girl. The cord was cut. The afterbirth was delivered. Livia moved with grace and calm, cleaning, pressing, comforting. The fire was rekindled. Water was brought. A baby nursed Dot outside. Dawn stirred. A single bird called from the fig tree. The shadows faded as the first gold of morning light touched the rooftop. Livia sat quietly on her stool, her hands resting on her lap. The mother slept. The sister snored. Lightly against the wall, a baby lay nestled against warm skin, fingers curled, mouth open slightly. Peace had come not as a grand moment, but as the slow return of breath and stillness, not another birth. Another quiet night passed into day, and nothing more needed to happen. The first golden hints of morning threaded through the narrow gaps in the wooden shutters, cutting thin lines across the clay walls of the room where a new life had entered. The world. Outside, the fig tree swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves casting sleepy shadows onto the courtyard tiles. The sounds of Ostia began to return, but softly slow footsteps of a merchant opening his stall, the soft murmur of a neighbor drawing water, the far-off clink of amphorae being lifted onto a cart. Life, as it always did, resumed. Dot inside. The room smelled of warmth and salt and the faint bitterness of dried herbs. The fire had burned low again, leaving a gentle warmth that filled the small space. The baby, barely hours old, slept swaddled. Beside her mother's chest, her breathing slow and even. The mother herself had drifted into a deep, exhausted rest, her face relaxed, her limbs still. Her sister had taken to the floor near the door, and remained there, curled under a worn blanket, breathing heavily. Livia did not sleep. She never did after a birth, not immediately. Instead, she sat on the stool she had occupied for most of the night, her hands folded in her lap, her back gently against the wall, eyes fixed somewhere between the flickering shadows and the child's small, sleeping face. This was the moment she cherished most, not the rush, not the cries, not the triumphant delivery, but the stillness that followed, a sacred hush that hung in the air like incense in a temple. It was a quiet she had come to love more than any. Sound Dot, she stood carefully and moved through the home with soft steps. She poured water from the clay jug and rinsed her hands, wiping them with a cloth from her basket. Then she began to tidy not with urgency, but with reverence. The linens were folded and placed beside the hearth. The clothes that could be cleaned were set aside. Those too stained were rolled and prepared to be buried or burned. She whispered a few words of thanks as she cleaned the birthing tools, placing each one back in its proper place within the basket. The amulet of Egeria she touched last, offering a silent prayer of gratitude before tucking it safely back into its pouch. Dot, as the room came back into quiet order, Livia moved outside. The sun had risen, casting its light through the alleyways and onto the dusty stone streets. A few people were moving now, an older man with a basket of olives, a girl carrying folded linens on her head. A young boy led a goat down the path, the animal bleating softly. Livia watched them all as though they were part of a painted mural, slow, simple, unchanging. She made her way to the small communal altar at the end of the street, where residents of the block left offerings each morning. It was nothing grand, just a raised stone slab, carved with faint symbols of the Lares, the household gods. On it sat remnants of the day before, a shriveled grape, a dried flower, a folded scrap of linen stained with wine. Livia reached into. her shawl, and placed a small piece of honeyed bread on the altar. She bowed her head and whispered thanks, not just for the birth, but for its peace, its simplicity, and the continued strength of her hands. On her return, the house had awakened. Slightly, the sister was sweeping the floor, careful not to wake the mother. The baby stirred, made a small sound, then nestled deeper into the curve of her mother's arm. Livia approached and sat beside them, her movements fluid and practiced. She checked the mother's pulse, her temperature, and the firmness of her belly. She examined the baby's limbs, her skin, and her breathing. All was well. Nothing more was needed. The naming must be prepared, the sister said, her voice low. Livia nodded. Roman custom held that a child was not named at birth. Instead, the naming came on the 8th or 9th day dies lustricus, when the newborn was considered strong enough to be formally welcomed. Until then, the child existed in a liminal state between spirit and citizen. The rituals would come, the offerings, the gathering, the whispered name. For now, she was simply the girl. Livia rose and gathered her things. The mother opened her eyes briefly and offered a small smile. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice hoarse but full. Livia touched her arm gently in response and turned to leave. She walked slowly back, through the winding lanes, past shuttered windows and blooming pots of rosemary, past sleeping cats and the soft laughter of two women washing laundry. The city was awake, but not hurried. It breathed with the same rhythm as always, measured, patient, calm. When she returned to her home, the room welcomed her with familiar quiet. The fig from 2 nights ago remained uneaten on its plate. She smiled faintly, picked it up, and took a bite, sweet, almost too sweet. She set the rest aside and removed her shawl, letting it fall across the edge of her cot. Her basket was placed carefully at the foot of the bed. She stretched her arms, rolled her shoulders, and lay back onto the straw-filled mat. Above her, the ceiling was the same as ever. A faint crack in the plaster, a cobweb in the corner, the soft flutter of cloth from the open window. She let her eyes close slowly, every muscle loosening, the weight of the long night leaving her inch by inch. She thought of the baby, of the mother, of the way the candlelight had looked on the baby's wet skin. She thought of the thousands of women who had come before, who had braved in that same first cry, of the hands, like hers, that had caught life again and again without ever being named in stone or scroll. The city moved on. Markets opened, coins exchanged hands. Soldiers marched to drills, ships docked and departed. But in one small room inn, one small street, Livia slept out, and the world for a time was still. The days passed in their usual, unhurried way. The sun rose and dipped, oil lamps flickered and dimmed, and the soft rhythm of Ostia life continued, shaped by tides and trade, pigeons and prayers. For Livia, the passing days between birth and naming were sacred, quiet, and unshaken by urgency. She had returned to her home, tended to her tools, and gone about her routines with the same practiced calm that defined her existence. There had been no new births in the days that followed, no sudden knocks at the door, and no sharp cries for aid, only the soft thrum of daily life. But today, the 8th day since the child's birth, was different. Today was Dies Lustricus, the day of purification and naming dot in Roman tradition. The Dies Lustricus was more than a celebration. It was a moment of spiritual transition, a time when the newborn passed from the shadowy world between life and death into full human status, accepted by the gods and the community. Before this day, the baby remained vulnerable, nameless, held in a quiet spiritual limbo. Now, the child would be claimed by her family, given an identity, and formally blessed under the watch of the gods. Livia woke earlier than usual. The sun had not yet crested the rooftops, and the sky was still the pale gray of deep dawn. A thin fog hung low over the streets, softening the outlines of buildings and blurring the silhouettes of early risers. Her room was cool, and she wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she sat by the hearth, rekindling the fire with practiced motions. The coals from the night before welcomed the straw with a gentle hiss, and soon a faint warmth spread across the room. She boiled water for tea fennel, mint, and a sliver of dried apple, and sat for a while, sipping in silence, the basket of her tools untouched in the corner. Today, her hands would still be. She was not a healer today, not a caretaker, not even a guide. She was a witness, a presence, a guardian of meaning. When the sun finally broke through the mist, casting golden light across the dusty tiles of Vesti, her floor, she stood and dressed in her cleanest tunic, a pale one, smelling faintly of lavender from where it had hung above drying herbs. Her shawl, a soft gray wool worn at the edges, was wrapped carefully over her shoulders. In her hand, she carried a small offering, a bundle of rosemary tied with a linen string. It was not required, but it felt right. The home of the mother, the child, and her sister had changed in small ways. Fresh branches of laurel hung above the doorway, and the front step had been swept clean of dust. Inside, the air held the scent of oil and baking bread. The baby was already awake, wrapped tightly and cradled in the arms of her aunt, who rocked her gently in rhythm with the distant sounds of a flute drifting through the street. The mother sat upright on a cushion, her face still pale, but glowing with something quiet and proud. She looked stronger now. Fed, slept, seen. She met Livia's eyes with a soft smile. "She will be called Tulia," she said, and the name hung in the air like perfume. It was not official yet, not until the ritual was complete, but the saying of it made something shift. Tulia, a name, a person, a daughter of Rome. Livia stepped closer and gently laid her fingers on the baby's forehead, murmuring a private blessing, not a grand prayer, but a whisper from one woman to another. "May you know long days," she breathed. "May your feet walk on warm stone. May your hands hold olive branches, and may your name carry peace." The family prepared the offerings, small cakes, incense, and a bowl of milk. The ritual itself was simple, conducted at home, beneath the watch of the Lares and the Pinades, household gods carved in clay and wood. A sister lit the incense. The mother placed a drop of milk on the baby's lips. A name was spoken once, then again, Tulia. And with that, the girl passed fully into no trumpets, no procession, no crowds, just the murmur of 3 women. In a sunlit room, a baby blinking slowly beneath a swath of linen, and the soft crackle of incense filling the air. Livia stayed a while longer, helping to clean, sharing a small cup of watered wine, and eating a sweet cake pressed with sesame. Seeds, they spoke little. There was a kind of reverence to the morning, a sense that words might bruise the softness of the moment. When she finally left, she did so with a nod, her shawl wrapped tightly once more, the rosemary offering now tucked in a small clay jar near the family shrine. Outside, the streets were beginning to bustle. Fishmongers called out their prices. Children played near the bathhouse wall. A scribe sat beneath a canopy, reading a letter aloud for an old woman. Life had returned. The day, once sacred, now joined the others, folded into the slow fabric of time. Livia walked without direction, letting her feet guide her through the city's heartbeat. She passed the market, skirted the edge of the forum, and found herself near the temple of Juno Lucina. It was not grand, certainly nothing compared to the great temples of Rome, but it was hers. The goddess of childbirth, protector of mothers, watcher of first breaths and final sighs. Livia did not enter, but stood quietly at the edge, watching as a priestess swept the steps with a straw broom. The air smelled of flowers and old incense. She bowed her head, whispering again, not for Talia this time, but for herself. Her work was quiet. Her name would never be carved in marble. But in this city of stone, she helped bring forth. Truly mattered. The breath of life, the bond of family, the resilience of mothers. After the temple, she returned home. The door creaked open as always. The light filtered in just as it had every other day. She placed her shawl on the hook, poured a small bowl of barley, and added a fig, the last one from the dish. Finally eaten dot, she sat by the hearth, her feet bare, her hands folded, her eyes half closed, and for the first time in many days, she allowed herself to rest fully, deeply, without the weight of waiting dot in the city beyond her walls. Children cried, laughter spilled across alleyways, pots clanged, and prayers were whispered. But in this room there was peace. The morning sun filtered gently through the cracks in the shutters, casting slow-moving lines of light across the clay floor of Livia's small home. She rose as she always did, not with the urgency of a summons, but with the quiet rhythm of habit. Her hands moved over the same worn surfaces, the jug, the cloth, the smooth edge of her basket, as if retracing the lines of a familiar song. There had been no new birth calls for several days now, no urgent knocks or whispers of pain drifting through alleyways. The city was at peace, and so, too, was she. It was the kind of morning meant for walking, not for errands or ritual, but for the kind of wandering that allows the mind to meander as freely as the feet. Livia tied her shawl loosely over her shoulders and stepped out into the soft light. The streets were already stirring. A boy chased a rooster across a tiled courtyard. A merchant adjusted the angle of his canopy to catch more light. The baker's daughter, face dusted in flour, offered a small nod as Livia passed. She walked without aim at first, letting her path curve with the bends of the city, through shaded alleyways and sun-warmed plazas. Eventually, she found herself climbing the low hill at the edge of Ostia, where an older woman lived, Terentia, once a midwife like Livia, now retired, her back bent and her hands arthritic, but her mind sharp as flint. Terentia had been Livia's teacher, her first mentor, and in many ways, her spiritual mother. The small home was as Livia remembered it, simple, adorned with dried herbs hanging from beams, small votive figures lining the edge of a windowsill. She knocked lightly on the wooden frame. From inside came the sound of movement, a chair scraping, sandals shifting, and then the door opened slowly. "Ah," Terentia said, her voice soft but unmistakably warm. "You've come." "I had time," Livia replied. "There's always a time when you've walked far enough," Terentia said with a knowing smile. Stepping aside to let her enter, the home smelled of sage and warm oil. A single window let in light that made the dust in the air shimmer like tiny motes of gold. Livia sat on the low stool by the hearth as Terentia poured them both cups of water steeped in dried fig and marjoram. They sipped in silence for a while, as they always did. There was no need to fill the air with noise. The years between them had formed a language of glances and gestures, of shared stories told, not in words but in memory. "Any new ones?" Terentia asked after a time. "A girl, Talia, born strong, quiet. She was named 2 days ago. Good name, strong bones in it." They spoke then of births past, of the mothers they had helped, of cries they had quieted, of nights spent waiting for the moon to turn before a child would come. Terentia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her walking stick, but her eyes were as bright as ever. "Do you remember your first?" she asked suddenly, looking at Livia not with curiosity, but with a kind of mischievous test. Livia smiled faintly and nodded. "How could I forget?" She leaned back against the stone wall, and let her mind travel. It had been years ago, so many that the streets of Ostia had looked different then. She had been barely more than a girl, still new to the sharp smells of vinegar and blood, still learning how to read the signals in a mother's eyes, still frightened by the unpredictable rhythm of labor. The woman had been young, too, her belly round and heavy with her first child. The room had been thick with fear, an aunt wringing her hands, a husband pacing outside. Terentia had stood beside Livia, guiding her hands, whispering each step like a spell. The pain had been long and hard. The cries were louder than Livia had ever expected. There had been a moment when the child would not come, when the silence stretched too long, and her hands shook, useless. But Terentia had spoken one word, breathe, and somehow the silence broke. The baby arrived, slick and screaming, and Livia had caught her, her arms suddenly filled with life. She had wept then, not from sorrow or pain, but from something deeper, something ancient, something she would later come to understand as joy. Her name was Eunia, Livia said aloud, the memory settling softly like dust. Terentia nodded. I remember. She lived. The mother, too. Yes, and you did well. They sat in silence again, the moment honored without fanfare. Later, Livia stood and embraced the older woman. Thank you, she said. For what? For showing me how to wait and how to trust. Terentia smiled. That's all midwifery is. Waiting and trusting. The rest comes with time. Livia returned to the streets, the memory still warm against her skin. She followed the slope of the hill back down into the heart of the city, toward the herbal market that wound through a series of narrow stalls and shaded awnings near the old grain warehouse. The market buzzed with quiet energy vendors calling softly, clothes rustling in the wind, the soft thunk of mortar grinding seed to powder. She moved through the rows, stopping to examine bundles of rue, jars of poppy syrup, and clusters of sage wrapped in string. She greeted a familiar face, Lucius, the herb seller, who offered her a pouch of dried lavender without asking. For the tired mothers, he said with a wink. She nodded and handed him a few coins. The exchange was silent, but deeply understood. At the edge of the market, a woman stood speaking to another midwife, young, eyes full of questions. Livia watched them for a moment. The older woman spoke, gesturing with her hands, showing how to hold, how to guide, how to wait. Livia smiled faintly. Another pair, beginning the same journey she once had. She turned and made her way back home as the sun began its slow descent behind the rooftops. The shadows grew longer. The pigeons gathered on window ledges. Children laughed in the distance. Inside her home, she placed the lavender on her shelf, lit the small lamp by her bed, and poured a shallow bowl of water. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders and landed softly on the cot. She sat, not with urgency, not with weight, but with the simple grace of someone who has seen much and held more. The night wrapped itself gently around the city. Oil lamps flickered in windows. A dog barked once and went quiet. Somewhere, a mother sang a lullaby to a newborn child. And Livia, Roman midwife, listened not with ears, but with the quiet strength of a life spent in stillness, in waiting, in holding space for life. She closed her eyes. And slept. It was still early when the young messenger arrived, a boy, no older than 12, his sandals caked in dust, his tunic slightly askew, and his cheeks red with effort. He held a rolled wax tablet pressed tightly against his chest and spoke between breaths. For the midwife, Livia. She met him at her doorway, eyes soft but alert, and took the message without a word. The seal bore the mark of the Gellia family, a noble name, landowning and influential. Their villa seated on the edge of the Campagna, just beyond the city's farthest grain fields. The woman in labor was one of theirs. Cornelia Jellia, wife of a senator's son, now nearing the end of her confinement. Livia had been recommended to them by another matron who had seen her work firsthand. And now the call had come. She thanked the boy, gave him a small crust of bread and a gulp of watered wine, and sent him back to his master with a nod. Inside, she moved swiftly, but without rush, gathering the tools she might need, tucking bundles of herbs into linen wraps, folding extra cloths with practiced fingers. She added 2 votive amulets, a jar of olive oil, a length of clean wool cord, and a carved wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. This was not the first time she had been called to a villa, but it was rare. The wealthy had their customs, their own expectations. Birth among them was as much a performance as it was a process. Appearances mattered. Rooms were scented and arranged with care, not always for practicality, but for presentation. Yet beneath it all, the same truths held. Pain was pain, life was life. And a mother's fear was no different, whether her walls were marble or mud. The journey began just as the sky lightened, painting the eastern edge of the world in pale gold. She was offered a place in a 2-wheeled cart, drawn by a slow, plodding mule, the driver silent and drowsy, his straw hat tilted against the morning sun. They moved steadily along the road that ran from Ostia toward the inland hills, past fields of barley just beginning to turn golden, past olive groves stretching in quiet rows, and past clusters of fig trees heavy with ripening fruit. The air grew cooler as they climbed. Livia wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, not from cold, but from the weight of memory. The road brought back the feel of older journeys, when she was still learning, when every call beyond the city felt like a test, a measure of whether she belonged among those who caught life in their hands. By midday, the villa rose into view. Pale stone walls, columns wrapped in ivy, and a tiled roof that shimmered faintly under the sun. The estate was grand, but not ostentatious elegant, in a way that suggested quiet wealth, not brazen power. 2 servants met them at the gate, eyes polite but cautious, and led her down a shaded path lined with carved hedges and small fountains trickling with clear water. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of myrrh and lavender. The atrium was cool, its floor inlaid with mosaic patterns of birds in flight. Soft voices echoed through the corridors, gentle, measured, carefully restrained. She was shown into a side chamber, where she was given water and a fresh cloth to wash her hands. And then came the introduction. Cornelia Jellia lay on a cushioned couch, her face pale but composed, a soft veil draped loosely over her hair. She was young, no more than 20, and her eyes revealed what her lips did not: uncertainty, fear, the deep loneliness that often accompanied women of her station during childbirth. Attended by servants, hemmed in by expectations, but still alone in the most personal of moments, Livia bowed slightly, setting her basket near the bed. "She is in the early stages," said an older woman nearby, perhaps an aunt or household steward. "We sent for you as soon as the signs appeared. She has not eaten much. She has been restless." Livia nodded. She moved gently, checking the woman's pulse, touching her brow, asking quiet questions with her eyes as much as her words. Cornelia answered softly. "It hurts low in the back, and the pressure, it's steady now. Not sharp, not yet." Livia took her hand and gave a small smile. "That means the body is preparing. It listens better than we do sometimes." The room was too crowded, too perfumed. Livia requested that the windows be opened, that the brazier be moved back, and that the room be cleared of all but one attendant. At first, there was resistance, but eventually, her authority as a midwife, as the guide in this sacred moment, won quiet compliance. She preferred stillness, simplicity, and the woman, though noble, needed the same. Time passed slowly. Labor unfolded gently at first, tightenings that came and went like distant tides. Livia guided the rhythm, adjusting Cornelia's posture, offering sips of honeyed water, massaging her back with warmed oil. The silence in the room was interrupted only by soft breaths and the faint splash of the fountain in the courtyard beyond. Afternoon light slanted through the open shutters. The baby moved lower. With each hour, the contractions grew stronger. Cornelia cried out, once not a scream, but a low, frustrated sound. Livia held her gaze, breathing with her, showing her the rhythm. Let it rise, let it pass. You are stronger than this pain. Tears welled in the young woman's eyes. What if I fail? Livia shook her head gently. You are already doing it. This is not a test. This is becoming. Evening came. A single lamp was lit, casting soft orange light across the chamber. The room was quiet now, sacred in its intensity. Cornelia pushed. Again. Again. The rhythm took over, ancient, unstoppable. Then a cry, sharp, clear, alive. Livia caught the child, her hands sure and soft. A boy, strong-lunged and healthy. She placed him on his mother's chest. Cornelia gasped, half in relief, half in disbelief, as her son settled against her, the warmth of new life anchoring her back to the world. She wept then, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. The servants returned, their faces stunned by the quiet grace of what had occurred. Livia worked efficiently, cutting the cord, checking for tears, wrapping the infant, cleaning mother and child with care and precision. The room remained hushed, as if unwilling to disturb the miracle. By nightfall, Cornelia slept. The baby, swaddled and content, lay nestled in a cradle beside the bed. Livia sat in a corner, sipping cool water from a bronze cup, the strain of the day pulling gently at her limbs. She watched the flicker of the lamp, the rise and fall of the baby's tiny chest, the peace that came only after all the noise had faded. A servant approached her quietly. You are welcome to stay the night. A room has been prepared. Livia nodded her thanks, but made no move to rise. She would stay near the mother and child, at least until first light. Not from duty, but from choice, from instinct. This moment was not hers, but she had held it, protected it, witnessed it. Outside, the moon rose above the olive groves. The villa slept, and Livia, Roman midwife, guardian of breath and bone, rested in the quiet satisfaction of life safely begun once more. The journey back to Ostia was quiet. The wheels of the cart creaked gently against the worn stones of the road, and the mule plodded at its usual unhurried pace. Livia sat in the back, her shawl drawn around her shoulders, the soft wind combing through her hair, and her thoughts wandering like the thin morning mist over the fields. The countryside blurred slowly past Olive. Trees, pale and swaying, low stone walls trailing vines, and fig orchards heavy with ripening fruit. She had left the villa before sunrise, the noble mother and her newborn son sleeping peacefully in adjoining cots, the household bathed in the golden hush of satisfied silence. The birth had passed without complication, and yet it lingered in her mind, not for its difficulty or ease, but for the weight of its solitude. Despite the soft furnishings, the veiled servants, and the carefully chosen perfumes, there had been a loneliness in the young mother's eyes that reminded Livia of something far older than youth, kind of inherited sorrow passed down with the name, with the expectations. By the time the rooftops of Ostia returned to view, the sun was well into the sky, warming the tiles and the shoulders of workers hauling grain near the docks. The air smelled of sea salt and baked stone. Home greeted her with familiar stillness. She stepped inside, laid her basket down, and washed her hands slowly, methodically, watching the dust of the road swirl in the water before disappearing. She had barely rested when the next message came, not on a wax tablet this time, but in the form of a knock. Not hurried, not frantic, just quiet, persistent, and repeated twice more after she opened the door. A young girl stood there, no more than 16, with wide eyes and a cautious expression. Her tunic was simple and slightly wrinkled, and she clutched a folded piece of cloth in her hands. She asked for you, the girl said. Who did? Livia asked gently. Kasia. She lives on the southern edge, near the old grain stalls. She lost her husband last month, the potter. Livia's face softened. She knew of the potter, young, kind-eyed, and taken suddenly by fever during the last heavy rains. He had been seen at the baths one day, and by nightfall his skin had burned with the heat of illness. 2 days later, he was gone. A quiet loss in a city full of losses, but remembered by those who paid attention. Livia, always listening at the edges of the market, always watching for grief, had taken note. The girl led her through narrow streets, past walls shaded by hanging laundry, past a man mending a chair on a doorstep, past a boy tracing shapes in the dust with a stick. They stopped before a small dwelling, 2 rooms at most, with a cracked lintel above the door and a scattering of clay shards near the threshold. Inside, the air was still. Kasia sat on a low stool, her back to the door, her hair unbound, loose around her shoulders. She did not rise when they entered. She did not turn her head. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers tangled together. Livia dismissed the girl with a small nod of thanks and stepped quietly into the room. I heard you called for me, she said softly. Kasia nodded without looking. Not for a birth. Not yet. Her voice cracked. I didn't know who else. Who else? Livia sat beside her without speaking. The silence in the room was thick, not from awkwardness, but from the heavy hush that sorrow lays over everything, the kind that dulls sound, stretches moments, and makes even breath feel like an intrusion. Kasia looked thin, her skin pale. A bowl of half-eaten barley sat untouched nearby. A jug of water was tipped slightly, as though forgotten mid-pour. I think I'm with child, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Livia nodded once. Would you like me to check? Another nod. She moved gently, asking permission with each step, her hands soft and sure. Kasia lay back on the cot, eyes closed, a tear sliding down one cheek as Livia placed her fingers along the gentle curve of her lower belly. It was early, perhaps 7 weeks. The signs were subtle, a change in skin tone, the tenderness in her midsection, the absence of blood, but to Livia's trained senses, they spoke clearly. Yes, she said quietly. You are. Kasia opened her eyes slowly. I don't know what to do. You don't have to know today, Livia said. Today, you only need to breathe. They sat in silence again. Livia poured her a cup of water, placed a cloth against her forehead, and lit a small bundle of herbs in the clay bowl by the window, lavender, marjoram, and rue. The scent lifted into the air, faint and calming. He was kind, Kasia said suddenly. He made bowls with little birds on the rims. Said they reminded him of me. Livia smiled gently. I've seen them in the market. Kasia nodded. He always left one bowl unfinished. Said it was good luck. That a little imperfection kept the gods from being jealous. The quiet held them both for a while, long enough for the light to shift across the floor, casting shadows from the wooden chair near the hearth. Later, Livia rose and began to straighten the small room, not out of duty, but to bring shape back to a space that had begun to fall into sorrow's disarray. She gathered the bowl, folded a cloth, and swept aside the clay shards that still lay by the door. Kasia watched her with red-rimmed eyes. You don't have to stay, she said. I will, Livia replied. Not as a midwife, just as someone who understands what quiet feels like. They shared a bowl of soup, later lentils, onions, and a bit of old bread softened with oil. Kasia ate slowly, each bite a small return to the living. When the bowl was empty, she looked at Livia and asked, "Is it wrong to be afraid?" "No," Livia said. "It's natural, even expected. Did you ever?" Kasia stopped, unsure how to ask. "Lose someone?" Livia finished for her. She nodded. Double quotes, "Yes," Livia said. "Many, some I had just met. Some I had known for a lifetime. Each one left something behind." She didn't speak of the child she'd once carried, or the man whose voice still lingered in her dreams. Those were memories folded into her bones, too personal for words, too sacred for sharing in full. But the truth hummed between them, unspoken and understood. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching along the wall. "I'll come again tomorrow," Livia said, rising. "We'll talk more." "If you'd like." Kasia nodded. Her eyes no longer shimmered with fresh tears, but with the dull ache of someone learning how to live alongside sorrow. Livia stepped out into the cool evening air. A city moved around her, carts rumbling past, the clatter of amphorae being stacked, the call of a fishmonger offering the day's final catch. But her mind remained in that quiet room, with the widow and the tiny spark of life now growing beneath her ribs. Not every call she answered came with cries of labor. Some arrived as whispers, as stillness, as grief looks for a place to be held. In that, too, she was needed. The first birds had only just begun to call when Livia stepped out into the pale gray morning. The streets were still damp from the ocean air, and the city stirred only in fragments. An old man sweeping steps near the public baths, a dog slinking along the edge of a wall, the soft murmur of a woman's prayer offered into the days. First light. Today was not a day for birth. It was not a day for grief. It was a day of teaching. She had been invited to the temple of Bonadi, as she was each month, to tend to the herb garden, prepare healing tinctures, and guide a small circle of younger women who had begun to follow the path she had once learned slowly, humbly, without guarantee of mastery. The temple, modest but revered, sat nestled behind a row of flowering trees on the city's eastern edge, its entrance marked by a stone archway carved with ivy leaves and winding vines. Men were not permitted inside. It was a space set aside. For women only, a place of quiet power and gentle healing. Livia walked the familiar path slowly, breathing in the morning air, scented faintly with cypress and damp earth. Her basket was lighter than usual, just a few cloth bundles, her curved herb knife, and a small clay vial of rosemary oil wrapped in wool. She had no patients today, no mothers in labor, just the long sacred hours of tending and teaching. When she reached the temple gates, a young girl greeted her. Her name was Maya, no more than 17, her eyes always curious, her hands always restless. "Good morning, Livia," Maya said, bowing slightly. "The others are inside." "I've already watered the sage," Livia smiled. "And the chamomile?" "Still asleep under the straw covers, just as you taught." They passed into the temple garden, where neat rows of herbs stretched out beneath the rising sun. Lavender, rue, and mint grew alongside feverfew, fennel, and comfrey. The air was sweet with crushed thyme and warm stone. Bees hovered lazily above the blossoms, and a small clay fountain gurgled softly in the center of the courtyard. The temple itself was built of pale stone, its walls adorned with frescoes of women tending fires, grinding herbs, delivering babies, beneath the watch of the goddess. Inside, the air was cool and fragrant, lit by oil lamps flickering along narrow alcoves. An altar to Bonadi stood near the back, draped in ivy and rosemary, with offerings of bread, wine, and freshly gathered herbs placed reverently at its base. 3 other young women were already seated in a circle near the center: Julia, pale and bookish; Antonia, broad-shouldered and always laughing; and Celine, quiet and sharp-eyed. They looked up as Livia entered, their chatter quieting to an expectant hush. She settled onto a low stool and began by unwrapping her herb knife. Its handle darkened. Years of use. Today, she said softly, we'll prepare a poultice for bruising and sprains. Nothing dramatic, but important. The body must be cared for, even when it's not bearing children. They listened closely as she demonstrated the blend comfrey root crushed finely with olive oil, bound with wool, and left to steep near warm coals. They took turns grinding, pressing, and tying the soft linen wraps. Their movements were clumsy at first, but careful, respectful. Livia corrected only with touch and gesture. She preferred to let the hands learn before the mind caught up between tasks. She spoke of balance. Not all herbs are safe. Even those that heal can harm if used too soon or too much. Rue strengthens the womb, but taken during the first weeks, it can end a pregnancy. Know what you hold. Respect what you crush. They nodded. Julia took notes on a wax tablet. Antonia asked questions about heat and proportion. Selene, as always, said little, but her hands worked quickly, surely. Later, they moved into the garden. Livia showed them how to clip yarrow without damaging the new shoots, how to check for mold on stored rosemary, how to tell when the valerian root has reached its fullest strength. The sun rose higher, warming the tops of their heads, making the leaves shimmer in silver green. Birds fluttered from branch to branch, and the distant hum of the marketplace drifted faintly through the temple walls. But here, it was quiet, sacred. They returned inside to the cool interior, their baskets full. Maya laid her bundle before the altar, bowing her head as she whispered a prayer to the goddess. Livia watched her with a faint smile. There were many paths to womanhood in Ostia, some filled with noise and spectacle, others lined with coin and calculation. But here, within these walls, the path was slower, rooted in earth and blood. In quiet strength and patient hands. As the day wore on, they prepared tinctures, wrapped bundles for drying, and filled small clay jars with crushed lavender to be given to the city's public bath attendants. Selene asked if she could try making a mild sleeping draught for a woman in her neighborhood who had not slept through the night in weeks. Livia guided her hand as they measured out poppy syrup and valerian, speaking softly of dosage and timing. Must listen to the body, she said, even more than the words it speaks. Breath, color, and the shape of the eyes. They will tell you what the voice cannot. By late afternoon, the temple had filled with the scents of boiled herbs, warm oil, and sun-dried thyme. The students began to pack their bundles. Livia watched them move, still learners. Yes, but stronger now, steadier. Carriers of something older than any scroll, older than any shrine. As they left one by one, they each touched the base of the altar with their fingers, whispering thanks to Bonadi, goddess of healing, of childbirth, of hidden strength. The temple was quiet again. Livia remained behind. She swept the stone floor gently, replaced the cooled coals, and refilled the water bowl beneath the window where the doves sometimes perched. Then she sat before the altar, unwrapped the rosemary oil she had brought, and dabbed a drop at each corner of the small wooden statue of the goddess. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me be your hands today." The evening light turned, the garden gold. Outside the walls, the city resumed its rhythm carts rattling, voices rising, laughter from children playing in the dust. But within, time softened. The shadows lengthened. The oil lamps flickered gently as the temple sighed back into stillness. Livia stood, stretched her back, and walked slowly toward the gate. Tomorrow, there might be labor, or loss, or learning, but today had been enough. The sound came just after dusk, a pounding on wood, hurried, deliberate, and unrelenting. Livia opened her door to find a boy, barely taller than her stool, breathless and wide-eyed, holding out a folded linen square with trembling fingers. On the cloth, hastily inked, was a name she knew. Domitia, wife of Marcus Rufus, merchant of fine cloth and imported oils. The family's villa was located on the northern edge of the city, just past the amphora workshops and spice stalls, nestled behind high plastered walls. "They sent for you," the boy gasped. "She is in labor, and they said something is wrong." Livia did not ask questions. She moved with the practiced swiftness of someone who had known midnight calls, of someone who understood that time did not always move at the same pace for the living and the dying. Within moments, her satchel was filled linen wraps, a curved bronze birthing scissors, powdered myrrh, a clean sponge soaked in vinegar, and her small amulet of bonadie wrapped in red thread. The boy led her quickly through narrow streets and shadowed corridors, past stalls already shuttered and alleys echoing with the sounds of distant laughter and plates being scraped clean. The city smelled of evening smoke and oil, warm bread cooling on stone windowsills, the last whispers of sunlit dust settling into silence. By the time they reached the house, the sky had darkened into deep navy, and torches flickered at the gateposts. A servant met them at the entrance, his face drawn tight with worry, and led them briskly through a tiled courtyard into the atrium. The home, though wealthy, bore the heavy stillness of fear. Voices whispered in corners. A woman clutched a folded cloth between her hands, eyes red. Somewhere, a door slammed shut with too much force, then reopened quietly, apologetically. Livia was led up a small flight of stairs and into a wide room, dimly lit by oil lamps. The scent of spikenard and fear mingled in the air. Domitia lay in a large cushioned bed, her dark hair stuck to her temples, lips pale, eyes hollowed with exhaustion. Two women stood nearby, one a servant, the other likely a distant cousin or sister. Both looked toward Livia with a mix of desperation and hope. "She's been laboring since the morning," one of them said quickly. "The waters broke ours. Go. The baby hasn't come. She's weak. There's blood." Livia stepped closer, her presence calm but commanding. Her hands were steady as she examined Domitia, her pulse fast, her skin damp and cool, her breath short. She murmured gently, asking the woman to shift, then to press, then to breathe. Beneath her palm, Livia felt the hardness of the womb, the position of the baby off-center. Not stuck, but rotated wrong. A shoulder presentation, perhaps. Not impossible, but dangerous. She gave no sign of alarm, only motioned for clean cloths, hot water, oil, and herbs. The room moved around her, as if obeying an invisible current. She knelt beside Domitia and spoke softly. "You've come far," she said, "but the child is not on the right path. I can help, but it will take your strength. We must work together." Now, Domitia's lips moved, but no words came, only a nod, faint but determined. The hours that followed were slow, tense, and deliberate. Livia worked with her full focus, guiding the labor with every breath, every small adjustment of position. She applied gentle pressure to the lower belly, massaged the mother's back, and waited for each contraction like a wave she could ride with her. She murmured the chants she'd learned in her earliest training, not prayers, exactly, but rhythmic. Affirmations tied to the body, to breath, to life itself. Breathe in the pain. Let it pass. Open like the sea. Rise and release. But the baby would not turn easily. At one point, the room stilled entirely. Domitia had grown silent. Her eyes fluttered. Her lips turned slightly blue. Livia pressed a hand to her brow and whispered, "No, not yet." She reached for the myrrh powder, mixed it quickly with warm wine, and gently touched it to Domitia's lips. She massaged her chest, rubbed oil beneath her nostrils, and whispered her name again and again. Domitia stirred. The light in her eyes returned slowly, like embers under the wind. "Just a little longer," Livia said. "You are close. Very close." Finally, after another wave, another shift, another prayer, the baby turned. Livia felt the head move downward, felt the rhythm return to something that whispered a promise. Domitia cried out, her first strong cry in hours, and the others in. The room leaned forward, not daring to interrupt, but no longer able to look away. The child was born just after midnight. A girl, still and silent at first. Livia held her, fingers quick and sure, clearing the airway, rubbing the soles of the feet, whispering not just encouragement but command. "Come, little one, this world is yours. Take it." A soft gasp, then a cry thin, trembling, but real. The room exhaled all at once. Domitia wept not from pain now, but from relief, from life. Livia placed the baby on her chest and let the tears fall where they would. The rest of the night passed like a slow dream. Livia cleaned and swaddled the baby, stitched a small tear with precise, gentle hands, and prepared an infusion of raspberry leaf and honey to help the mother's womb settle. The servants moved reverently now, their steps light, their hands offering without asking. "Domit, I slept. The baby curled softly beside her. Livia sat in the corner of the room, her arms folded across her lap, her body aching with weariness, but full with something deeper, something quiet and strong and old. She did not sleep. She stayed until first light, until the sun touched the top of the walls and the shadows began to slip back into the corners. Only then did she gather her things. Only then did she touch the baby's forehead and whisper, "Welcome, child. You chose well." She stepped back into the street, just as the city began to wake. Bakers kneaded their first loaves. A cart clattered over stones. Somewhere, a bell rang in the port-dot, and Livia, midwife of Ostia, returned home through the shifting light each step. A heartbeat, each breath a prayer of gratitude to the quiet strength of women, the fragile balance of life, and the timeless rhythm she served. The morning began like many others, soft golden light spilling through the shutters. A faint breeze, carrying the salt of the sea across the rooftops of Ostia, and the distant clatter of wagons heading to the market. Livia rose early, as always, her body moving with the memory of habit, her hands steady as they folded linens, measured herbs, and ladled warm broth into a clay bowl. She had planned a quiet day perhaps to visit the widow Kasia, or tend their fevered child 2 streets over, but those plans were gently set aside when the knock came. It was not frantic, not urgent, but confident, purposeful. A young woman stood at her doorway, tall, with sharp features and hair braided high in the yow, Sabine style. Her name was Valeria. She had come to study. Again, "You said I could come back," she began, breathless from walking. "You said I could learn." Livia set her bowl down, brushing her hands on her tunic. "I did, but you must come as a student, not a storm." Valeria's grin flashed, unbothered. "Then let's begin." Livia had met her 2 months earlier at the Temple of Bonadi, where Valeria had interrupted a quiet herbal lesson by declaring, loudly and with great pride, that she had delivered her cousin's child entirely on her own. "He came out faster than anyone expected," she'd said. "I caught him in my shawl, screamed like a goat." The other women had giggled, unsure whether to be impressed or horrified. Livia had said nothing at the time, but later, in the garden, she'd approached Valeria and asked her to describe the birth in detail. What color the mother's face had turned, how strong the contractions had been, whether the placenta had followed naturally. Valeria had stumbled over the answers. Livia had nodded. Courage is good, precision is better. And yet there had been something in her, something untamed but real. A desire to help, perhaps, or the memory of someone. once lost, so Livia had allowed her to visit. Not every day, but often enough to keep the spark alive without letting it burn out of control. Today, Valeria returned eager, bright-eyed, and restless. "Do you have anyone giving birth today?" she asked hopefully. Livia shook her head. "No, but there are other lessons." Valeria slumped dramatically onto a stool. "Like what? Mixing herbs again?" "Like listening," Livia said. "Like watching. Like understanding the body without touching it." Valeria sighed, but followed her into the courtyard. There, Livia unwrapped bundles of dried fennel and chamomile. "Tell me what you smell," she said. Valeria sniffed. "Tea." Livia smiled faintly. "Try again. Warm, a little bitter. Like dry grass, but with something sharp underneath." "Better?" Livia nodded. "And this?" She crushed a leaf of rue between her fingers and held it out. Valeria flinched. "That one's awful, because it's powerful. Too much, and it can cause harm. Used wisely, it can save a mother's life." They spent the next hour mixing tinctures and preparing small pouches for the temple. Same ones left at the altar for women who came in silence, needing comfort, but unwilling to ask aloud. Valeria grew bored halfway through. "Isn't there something harder you can teach me?" she asked. "Some trick you use when a baby won't come out?" Livia looked at her long and quietly. "There are no tricks. There is only the work. The waiting, the watching. But you always know what to do. Because I've spent a lifetime listening. Valeria leaned back on her hands, frustrated. "I don't want to wait a lifetime." Livia said nothing, but inside she felt the familiar sting, that impatient fire she had once seen in herself, before the years had carved patience into her bones. That afternoon, a message arrived from a woman named Marcia, who was in her 8th month and had been experiencing unusual pain. It was not labor yet, but the signs were troubling tightness across the belly, sudden weakness in the legs. "Can I come?" Valeria asked. "You can walk with me," Livia said. "But you will not speak unless spoken to. You will watch. You will learn." Agreed. They walked through the midday heat, past rows of fig sellers and children chasing each other through dust. Marcia's home was modest 2 rooms, shaded by a small awning of reed matting. She greeted them with a forced smile, her hand resting low on her belly. "It started yesterday," she said softly, "like something pulling from the inside." Livia examined her gently, asking questions, pressing here and there, listening to the rhythm of her breath. The baby's position was good, the heartbeat strong, but the muscles were tightening prematurely. "You need rest," Livia said. "No lifting, no bending. No worry if you can help it." Marcia laughed lightly. "I'll try." As they walked back through the alleys, Valeria burst with questions. Why did you tell her to lie on her side? Why not give her something to stop the pain? Because the body is speaking. If I silence it too soon, I might miss the real message. But what if she goes into labor early? Then we help her early. Valeria frowned. You make it sound so quiet. It is. The following day, Livia was called to a neighbor's home, a woman in her first pregnancy. Labor beginning with slow, irregular pangs. She allowed Valeria to accompany her, but only on the condition that she observe in silence. For 4 hours, Valeria watched Livia move gently through the space, soothing, guiding, checking the rhythm of contractions, adjusting the posture of the mother, and wiping her brow with a cool cloth. She did not rush. She did not panic. She simply moved with the current of labor, like a boat that knows the river well. The child was born just before sunset, a quiet little girl with dark hair and strong lungs. Valeria's eyes shimmered. That was beautiful. Livia nodded. It always is. Can I help next time? In time? But that time came too soon. 3 days later, Livia was called to tend to a minor injury near the fish stalls. A boy had fallen and split his chin. While she was gone, another call arrived, an urgent one, from the family of a young servant girl going into early labor in the Western District. And Valeria, hearing it, went, alone. By the time Livia returned, she was told where Valeria had gone. Her breath caught in her chest, not from anger, but from fear. She hurried across the city, finding the house at last a cramped upper room, loud with pain. Valeria stood in the middle, hands shaking, blood on her tunic, the girl moaning. In fear. I tried, Valeria said, but Livia was already moving. She checked the girl quickly. The baby was breached, the head caught under the rib cage. Time was short. She gave instructions calmly, quickly, directing Valeria to hold towels, to steady the girl's hips, to stay back. The baby was turned gently, the cord untangled, the delivery completed with care that came not from bravado, but from reverence. The child lived. The girl lived. Barely. When it was over and the room was clean, Livia turned to Valeria. Why? I thought I could do it. You weren't here. I didn't want her to wait. Livia's voice was low. You endangered her. You endangered the child. This is not about proving yourself. This is about being ready. And you were not. Valeria looked down, tears streaking her face. I'm sorry. Livia sighed. The worst thing a midwife can carry is pride. She was silent for a long time. Come back tomorrow, if you still want to learn. And Valeria nodded, her hands still trembling, her eyes wide not with ego, but with understanding, a kind that only a near loss can teach. Livia left the house that night exhausted, her feet sore, her heart heavy, but her hope not extinguished. Every healer was once reckless. Every midwife is once too eager. The question is whether they learn, whether they grow, whether they stay. In the quiet of her home, she lit a lamp and whispered a soft prayer, not just for the girl who had survived, but for the girl who was learning, the one who might one day sit where she now sat, carrying the sacred rhythm of birth into the next generation. For once, the morning did not begin with urgency. No knocks on the door. No runners are out of breath. No cries from the alley or clatter of pots in the street. Just a hush. A stillness that carried through the open windows, laced with the scent of warm bread, fresh flowers, and the hum of the home. Sea waking slowly beneath the rising sun. It was the day of the goddess. Once a year, on the 3rd day of the 10th month, the women of Ostia gathered not in secrecy or sorrow, but in celebration. The temple of Bonadie opened its inner sanctuary, the garden gates wide, and the air thick with lavender and rosemary smoke. No men crossed the threshold. No business was discussed. It was a day for women to breathe freely, to remember that their hands not only healed and delivered, but danced and created and nourished. Livia rose early, bathed in warm water, scented with citrus peel and honey, and bound her hair with a length of red wool blessed at the last solstice. She did not wear her usual working tunic. Today she chose one woven in soft green, simple but whole, stitched long ago by a friend whose hands no longer sewed, but still pressed blessings into the shoulders of those she loved. The streets were bright with petals. Young girls scattered, marigolds and sweet basil along the cobbled paths, and doorways were hung with garlands of ivy and fig leaves. You could hear music if you walked slow enough, flutes, tambourines, soft humming from windows where mothers braided their daughters' hair. The usual clamor of Ostia merchants haggling, laborers shouting, the clang of metal was muted, as if even the men had agreed, for once, to let the city exhale. Livia reached the temple as the sun tipped over the walls, flooding the garden with gold. The priestesses were already there, laying out bowls of wine, honeyed nuts, and little cakes shaped like crescent moons. A brazier burned low near the altar, its smoke trailing into the pale morning sky. A gentle chant rose from a cluster of women kneeling in a semicircle praise to the goddess, not for war or riches, but for strength in silence, for wombs that endured, for milk that nourished, and tears that healed unseen. Livia found Maya among them, her former student, now a priestess aide, her fingers stained with herb dust, her eyes bright with purpose. "You came," Maya said, pressing a sprig of rue into Livia's palm. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied. All around the courtyard, women gathered in small clusters, some young and laughing, others bent with age, but no less radiant. There were midwives, cooks, vendors, poets, spinners, widows, and wives. There were mothers whose children played, with pebbles in the corners, and women whose arms had never held a child, but who carried wisdom just as deep. Today, there were no separations, only circles, only stories. In the central chamber, beneath a wide silk canopy, women painted one another's hands with colored oils and told tales of births that had begun with storms and ended in sunlight, of sickness cured with wild mint and warm cloths, of heartbreak, soothed by the steady rhythm of breath and time. Livia listened more than she spoke. She always had. But when asked, she told her tale not of the hardest labor or the worst loss, but of the first time she had realized she was more than her. Hands. It was a cold morning, she began, and the mother was alone, her family 3 provinces away. The child came quickly, a girl, but what she needed most wasn't herbs or stitches. She needed to be seen, to be held, to be told that she was still whole. Around her, heads nodded, eyes shimmered. A woman reached out and squeezed her hand, and in that squeeze was an entire history of shared understanding. As the sun climbed higher, a procession began. Not grand, no chariots or trumpets, but reverent. Each woman carried something she had made or tended: a jar of preserved olives, a piece of dyed cloth, a dried bouquet of fennel and poppy. They walked in slow circles around the altar, offering thanks and memory. When it was Livia's turn, she laid a small cloth bundle at the goddess's feet, a pair of worn shears wrapped in linen. "For the lives begun, and the ones we said goodbye to," she whispered. After the offerings came dancing. It began with tapping heels on stone, fingers on thighs, then movement. Small and steady, hips swaying, hands rising, bodies remembering what it felt like to move not for labor or survival, but for joy. Livia hesitated at first, watching as younger women spun and clapped. But then Celine, her quietest student, took her hand and gently pulled her into the rhythm. She danced, not like a girl, not like a priestess, but like a woman who had known pain, carried sorrow, and yet still had rhythm left in her bones. The courtyard filled with laughter, soft and echoing like wind through reeds. Someone passed the wine. Someone passed figs drizzled with honey. Someone whispered a joke that sent Maya into a fit of giggles that had tears running down her cheeks. It was not a day of forgetting. The losses still lived in their eyes. The aches in their joints did not vanish. But for one golden stretch of hours, the weight was shared. And shared weight is always lighter. As the sun dipped westward, shadows stretching long over the garden, the women began to gather for the final rite. One by one, they wrote a word just stone on a slip of bark or paper and placed it into the fire. Some words were names. Some were fears. Some were wishes. Livia held hers for a long moment before releasing it to the flame. Her word, stillness. The fire crackled softly, eating each offering, the smoke rising toward stars just beginning to glint above the rooftops. When the final ember faded, silence fell. Not hollow silence. Full silence. Sacred silence. the kind that speaks without sound, the kind that heals without touch. Livia walked home slowly through the lamplit streets, her body light, her spirit grounded. At her door, she paused, looked up at the sky, and whispered a simple thanks, not just to the goddess, but to the women, the ones who had danced beside her, the ones who had carried her, the ones who would come after. Tomorrow, the world would return to its noise. The births would resume. The grief would come knocking again. But tonight was for joy, for peace, for breath. She stepped inside, set her sandals aside, and lay down on her mat, her heart steady, her mind soft, and the memory of music still echoing in her bones. The sky was already turning when Livia stepped out that morning. It had rained lightly the night before, leaving the cobblestones slick and shining. But now the wind carried something heavier, thicker, damp, and restless. The kind of wind that made shutters creak and dogs whine. Still, she had work to do. A message had arrived just before sunrise from the family of a farmer whose wife, Lelia, was due to deliver any day. They lived beyond the city's edge, near the olive terraces that rolled out toward the marshes. Livia had planned to visit the next morning, but something in the messenger's tone urged her to go early. "She isn't in pain yet," he had sighed, "but she's uneasy. She dreams of water and wakes afraid." Livia had long ago learned to listen to such dreams. They often meant little, but sometimes they meant everything. She packed lightly some clothes, oil, scissors, a sprig of rosemary wrapped in waxed linen, and wore her heaviest cloak, though the sky had yet to release more than a few scattered drops. The path beyond Ostia wound through fields damp with dew, past clusters of poppies and bent olive trees whose trunks whispered in the rising wind. Livia walked steadily, her feet familiar with the rhythm, her breath even. But with every step, the sky grew darker, the wind thicker, and the smell of wet earth stronger. Just as she reached the edge of the marsh road, the sky broke open. Rain fell not in droplets, but in sheets, slanting sideways and wild. Thunder rolled above, like the voice of old gods stirring in their sleep. Livia pulled her hood tighter and pressed forward, head bowed. She knew she was close. She had been here once months ago, when Lelia was still swelling softly, her feet barely beginning to ache. But the path was narrow, the water now running like a small stream over the stones, and she could barely see more than a few steps ahead. Then, a flickered torchlight in a window just ahead. A low stone house, unfamiliar. Not the farmer's, but shelter nonetheless. She knocked loudly. Once, twice. On the third knock, the door opened a crack. A woman's face appeared wary, older, lines carved deep around her eyes. "I'm sorry," Livia said, water running down her cloak. "The storm. May I wait here?" "Just until it slows." The woman hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in before you drown." Inside, it was warm and dim, the fire lit low. A single-room dwelling, neat but sparse. 2 children played with bits of straw in the corner. A man sat sharpening a blade near the hearth. The woman offered no name. Livia removed her wet cloak and settled near the fire. "I'm on my way to the Marius farm," she said. "The wife is close to her time." The man glanced at her, then at the woman, and said nothing. The woman gave a small nod. "You'll not reach it soon, not in this mess." Thunder cracked above them again. Outside, the rain came down even harder. For a while, they sat in silence. The children whispered to each other. The fire popped. The wind howled. Then, from the small bed in the corner, a soft sound, a groan. Livia turned. She had not noticed the young woman lying there. She looked no more than 16, curled on her side, hair damp with sweat, her face twisted again with pain. Another groan, low, uncertain. "Who is she?" Livia asked gently. The older woman stiffened. "My niece. I'm tending her." Livia moved closer quietly and knelt by the bedside. The girl opened her eyes green, frightened, pleading. Her belly was full, her tunic damp near the hem. Another pain came. Her whole body trembled. "How far along is she?" Livia asked. The older woman hesitated. 7 months. "Too early," Livia whispered. She placed a hand on the girl's belly, hard, tight, pulsing with contraction. "This isn't false labor." The man stood. "We didn't ask for help." "No," Livia replied calmly. "But the girl is asking, even if she can't speak it." Another pain came. This one sis stronger. The girl gasped, tears slipping down her cheeks. Livia turned back to the woman. "Do you have clean linens? Hot water? Olive oil?" The woman didn't move. "She's not married. If word spreads..." Livia looked her square in the eyes. "You'll have no word to spread if the child dies, or the girl." That was all it took. The woman vanished. Into the back room, re-emerging with supplies. Livia took command, not loudly, not forcefully, but with the quiet certainty of one who has delivered life more times than she can count. She washed her hands with vinegar and wrapped her wrists in cloth. The girl moaned again. Livia sat beside her, stroked her hair, and whispered, "You are safe. You are not alone. I am here." The labor progressed quickly, too quickly. The girl's body shook with the intensity, her face white with effort. The baby was small, not yet ready, but determined. Livia guided the birth with great care, whispering not just to the girl, but to the child. "Come gently, come strong." The baby was born just past midday. Tiny, wet, but breathing. Livia wrapped her in soft cloth and placed her on the girl's chest. The room was silent, save for the quiet sounds of new life. The girl cried. So did the older woman. The man turned away. "She will need rest," Livia said. "Warmth. And food. And to be believed." No one answered, but they listened. When the storm passed, Livia rose, wrapped her cloak around her shoulders again, and stepped back into the now dripping world. The air was clean, the road slick but passable. The sky had cleared in the west, streaked with light. She never knew the girl's name, never learned what story would be told about the day a stranger helped bring life into the world behind shuttered windows and guarded eyes. But that didn't matter. The child was breathing, the mother was safe, and the storm had passed. That was enough. The day began with light and warmth. The spring air had softened the morning chill, and for once the city stirred gently. The markets were slow to rise, the calls of vendors unhurried, and the alleys echoed only with the laughter of children chasing each other across sun-warmed stones. Livia had no urgent calls that morning. Her basket was half full, just a few. Dried herbs to deliver to an elderly spinner with sore joints, and a fresh mixture of goat's milk and fig extract she'd prepared for a child's persistent cough. It was rare, these quiet days, when no birth loomed, no fever threatened, no knock startled her from rest. She intended to walk along the Tiber, past the mills and toward the low wooden bridge, where fishermen gathered in the shade, their voices low and lines cast lazily into the slow current. But before she could reach the corner of her street, a figure stepped out from beneath a portico. Cloaked, hooded, deliberate. A woman, tall and regal, even in shadow. "Midwife," the woman said softly. "May we speak?" Livia paused. She knew the voice. Faintly accented Latin. Precise. Unhurried. Julia Severina. A senator's wife. Known for her silver hair, her influence, her quiet charity, and for her discretion. Livia gave a small nod and gestured toward her doorway. "Come in." Inside, the room was warm, the air still scented with lavender from the night before. Livia poured a little wine into a cup and set it on the table. Julia Severina remained standing. "I am not here for the ceremony," she said. "I need help. A kind of help no one must know about." Livia's heart slowed. She had heard this tone before, though not often. It always came wrapped in silence. "Tell me," she said. Julia pulled back her hood. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red around the edges. "I am with child." Livia said nothing at first. Just let the words rest in the room. "You already have children," she said gently. "3 grown sons, a daughter married. This one is different. I cannot keep it." The words were soft, but each one dropped like a stone into still water. "You are not ill," Livia said carefully. "I know your body. It is strong." "Yes." "Then it is a choice." "Yes." The silence deepened. Outside, a bird chirped once, twice, then fell quiet. "You know what you are asking me," Livia said. "I do. And you know it is dangerous, not just to you, to me." Julia bowed her head slightly. "I would never name you, not even in death." Livia studied her. This was not panic, not shame, but certainty, a heavy certainty. "Is the child unwanted?" Livia asked. "Or is it dangerous to your life?" Julia met her eyes. "It is both." "Explain." "My husband has grown cruel with age. He suspects every shadow. I have kept this secret for nearly 2 months, but I cannot hide much longer. He will know, and he will not forgive me. Not for this, not for how it happened." Livia understood fully the layers beneath the surface. She did not ask for the name. She did not need to. "You have others who would take you in." "If I lived?" "Yes." Livia rose. She walked to a small box tucked beneath the hearth and opened it. Inside were vials, cloths, powders wrapped in beeswax, and a tiny bundle of dried blue cohosh. She picked up nothing. "Not yet. You are early enough," she said quietly. "It can be done, but it must be gentle, slow. I will not force it." Julia nodded once. "I do not ask for haste, only silence and care." That afternoon, Livia walked with her to a house just outside the walls of Ostia, a place she kept for moments like these, not often, but real enough to prepare for. It belonged to no one. It was watched by no one. Just a single room, clean and dry, with a straw bed, a pitcher of fresh water, and shutters that opened only to the sea. Julia remained for 3 days. Livia visited each morning and evening. She brought infusions, parsley, rue, mint, and crushed pomegranate rind, measured not for strength, but for harmony. She monitored the pulse, the temperature, the color of the eyes, and the lips, and she said little. Julia did not weep. She did not pray. But once, Livia found her standing near the open shutters, whispering to the sea. On the 4th morning, the bleeding began, not heavy, but steady. Livia sat beside her through it, kept her cool, pressed clothes when needed, spoke softly, not of the body, but of gardens and seasons, and the way fig trees leaned toward the light. By sunset, it was done. Julia slept for hours, her breath even, her face pale but calm. When she woke, she looked at Livia and said, "Thank you for doing this, and for not asking me to explain it further." Livia nodded. "It is not mine to judge, but you carry it now. I carry many things. That is the nature of our work." When Julia left the next day, cloaked and quiet, she paused at the threshold. "You saved me," she said, "not only my body, but my will to live." Livia placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then do not waste that life. Be who you must be." And then she was gone. That evening, Livia sat alone, her mortar and pestle before her, grinding fennel for a new mother with colic. The scent rose strong and sweet, curling into the corners of the room. She thought of Julia, of the weight she bore, of the silence women carried between each other, or not always in words, but in understanding. Some would say what she had done was wrong. Others would say it was mercy. She had long stopped naming it. She did not need a name for everything. She only needed to know what was needed. And in this, there was peace. Not easy, but peace. Outside, the wind shifted, and the sea called in the distance. The night was still, and Livia, midwife of Ostia, laid her head down, knowing that life did not always mean birth. Sometimes it meant return. Sometimes it meant rescue. Sometimes it meant choosing not to step forward, but to stand still and guard the flame of another until it flickered strong again. The letter arrived at dawn, slipped under the door with no knock, no messenger waiting outside, only the faintest trace of sandal prints in the dust. The parchment was folded neatly, sealed with blue wax, the color of mourning in the southern provinces. Livia sat with her tea for several moments before opening it. Something about the seal, the silence of its arrival, and the familiar curve of the ink already told her what it would say. The message was short. Domitia, second child, first lost, labor near. She asks for you, please. Livia folded the note again and tucked it into her satchel. No hesitation. She knew Domitia, had known her for nearly 6 years. The first time, it had been a bitter winter, and Domitia was a new bride, barely 17, flushed with joy and fear, wrapped in silks from her husband's trade routes. Livia had delivered the child, a boy, but not breathing. His heart had stopped within the womb, silent and still. They never found why. Sometimes there is no reason, no fault, only the ache that settles deep and stays quiet for years. Domitia had not spoken to her after that day, not in anger, just absence, a long silence. Until now, Livia packed carefully linen cloths, warmed olive oil, fresh cotton soaked in rosewater, and a small carved figure of Bonadie that fit neatly into the palm of her hand. The walk to Domitia's home took longer than she remembered. The path wound through older parts of Ostia, past courtyards shaded by crumbling walls, fig trees overgrown with wild vines, and low stone homes where generations slept in the same beds. The city was humming slowly, fishermen tugging nets, fruit sellers stacking lemons in quiet towers. But Livia barely heard it. Her thoughts were with the woman she was about to see. The gate was ajar. A servant led her into a shaded room where Domitia reclined on a cushioned bed. She was thinner now, quieter. The fullness of wealth had softened, replaced by something more grounded. Her hair was braided loosely over one shoulder, and her hands lay calmly on the swell of her belly. Her eyes, when she turned, were calm but cautious. You came. You asked. I didn't think you would. Livia sat beside her, placing the small satchel on the ground. Because of what happened? Because of how I vanished. You did what you needed. Domitia looked away. They said it was no one's fault, but I couldn't believe it. Sometimes belief takes longer than breath. The room was quiet. The curtains fluttered. Outside, a bird called once, twice, then flew off. I'm afraid, Domitia whispered. I know. Not just losing the child, of what it will do to me if I do. Then we don't let fear be the only thing in the room. Labor had not yet begun. The pains were irregular, soft waves that came and went like a tide at low moon. Livia placed a hand gently on Domitia's abdomen, felt the firmness of the womb, the subtle shifting beneath the skin. The baby moved, strong, curious, present. You've carried well, Livia said. The child is steady. So was the last, Domitia replied. Livia didn't argue. She didn't soothe. She simply nodded. This time, I will not let you do it alone. For the next hours, they sat in silence. Livia prepared the room-stacked clothes near the bed, lit oil in a clay lamp, and placed a basin of warm water on a nearby stool. She added mint leaves to the pitcher, restored herbs into bundles, hummed a low tune under her breath, not for the baby, but for the mother. The air grew heavier with each passing hour. The soft clouds from the morning thickened into a low mist that curled beneath the window panes. By evening, the contractions were more regular, still far apart, but enough to anchor Domisha's breathing. "It feels different," she whispered as one passed through her. "Like my body is trying to be brave." "It is," Livia said. "So are you." They ate together that evening, a broth of lentils, olives, and thyme. Livia fed her in small spoonfuls, pausing when the pains returned, wiping her brow each time the tension came and went. "Will it be like last time?" Domisha asked. "No two births are the same. But will it feel like that moment again?" Livia thought for a long moment. "It may, but the moment after will be different, because I am here." "Because you are not the same woman." Domisha closed her eyes. "What if I cannot do it? Then I will help you do it. I will carry the fear for you, just for a little while." The labor crept on into the night. The contractions lengthened, deepened. Her breath grew louder, her face flushed. Sweat gathered at her collar. Livia massaged her lower back, whispered reminders, fed her honey and water, and reminded her to breathe not from her throat, but from her feet. "Breathe through the floor," she said softly. "Let the earth take it from you." Around midnight, the child began to descend, slowly, steadily. Domisha cried once, and then again, and then let the tears flow without shame. "I thought I was stronger," she gasped. "You are," Livia said. "Crying does not mean breaking. It means your body knows this is sacred. It hurts. Then let it. Pain is a river. We do not stop rivers. We float. And float." She did, wave by wave. The child was crowned just before dawn. Livia crouched low, hands poised, face steady. One more push, and then one more breath. Domisha gave everything she had left. The child slipped into the world with a cry, not loud, not weak, but clear. A girl, skin pink, hair dark, eyes wide. Livia wrapped her in warm cloth, rubbed her gently, and placed her on Domisha's chest. "You did it." Domisha stared at the child for a long moment. Then she wept, not from fear, not from pain, but from relief. Deep, shaking, holy relief. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's breathing. So are you," Livia said. "That matters too." For the rest of the morning, the room was full of nothing but the rustle of cloth, the slow rhythm of nursing, and the soft shifting of a mother meeting her child for the first time without fear. Livia sat nearby, hands folded, eyes calm. She would stay until the next morning. She always did, after a birth like this one, born not just from a womb, but from a wound. She made tea from fennel seeds and placed a lavender sachet near the headboard. She cleaned the floor, warmed the stones, and added rosemary to the basin. Domisha slept in the late afternoon, the child curled at her side like a leaf resting on still water. When she woke, Livia would be there. When the night fell, again she would be there. And when Domisha finally rose, days later, and stepped out into the city with her child held close, Livia would be there too, just far enough away to let her stand on her own, but close enough to catch her should the winds return. Not every birth was a beginning. Some were continuations. Some were healings. Some were second chances at life, not just for the child, but for the mother who had dared to try again, to breathe again, and to open her hands to hope one more time. The summons came by courier, not by word of mouth. A young boy dressed in fine linen, bearing a sealed scroll, waited outside Livia's doorway before sunrise, shifting from foot to foot with the nervous energy of someone who didn't quite belong on her street. His sandals were new, his voice rehearsed. "You are requested, midwife. Immediately. A senator's household, near the forum." Livia took the scroll and read the neat lettering, firm, formal, almost cold. It came from the house of Lucius Tarquinius Marula, a senator of high standing and old money, whose family crest was carved into the facades of several temples. His daughter-in-law, Valeria, was in labor with her first child, and the house midwife had fallen suddenly ill. "They want discretion," the boy added, his voice lowering as he peeked over his shoulder. "And someone skilled." Livia packed quickly. She added extra clothes and sweet-smelling oils, a fresh bundle of sage, and a vial of laudanum just in case. It was rare to be called to the heart of Rome itself, rarer still to be trusted by the elite. But her name had traveled far in recent years, whispered through streets and among servants, between freedwomen and noblewives alike. She did not chase status, but it seemed status had found her. The journey to the city was long, the road winding through fields still damp from overnight rain. The sun rose steadily behind her, casting long shadows over aqueducts and villas, until the walls of Rome came into view, tall, proud, draped in the golden glow of early light. The gates let her through without delay. Someone had sent word ahead. Inside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, vendors shouting, soldiers clanking, children laughing. But as she reached the upper quarters, the noise faded, replaced by the hush of influence. Tall columns, manicured gardens. Porticos swept clean before each step. The Tarquinius villa stood 3 stories tall, its entrance flanked by carved lions and fountains of marble. A slave in a deep blue tunic greeted her and led her without a word through a series of winding hallways, past high archways and tiled courtyards, past busts of ancestors staring down with stony judgment. The birthing chamber had been prepared with care. The walls were lined in soft drapery, the windows shuttered to dim the light. Valeria lay propped on a couch of white linen, her face pale, hands gripping the arms tightly. She was young, perhaps, 18, with a narrow frame and eyes that darted quickly when Livia entered. 3 women stood nearby, noble companions, perhaps, or cousins, whispering among themselves with nervous glances. One of them opened her mouth to speak, but Livia raised a gentle hand. "I know why I'm here." Valeria's breathing was shallow, lips were dry. Livia approached her slowly, kneeling by the couch. "You are in good hands now," she said softly, "and I will not leave you." Valeria tried to nod. A tear slipped down her cheek. "They said the house midwife is ill." "Yes, but you are not alone." The next few hours were slow. The labor was still early, though steady. The child was well positioned, but Valeria's body was tense, gripped by fear, overwhelmed by the weight of the room, the expectation, the eyes of ancestors etched into the plaster above. Livia asked for privacy. At first, the women resisted, but eventually they left one by one, and the chamber fell silent except for Valeria's breathing and the soft sound of water being poured into basins. Livia lit a small lamp of lavender, oil, and massaged Valeria's hands with warmed rose salve. She spoke little, just enough. "Your body knows what to do," she whispered. "You are safe here." Time moved slowly, as it often did in such rooms. Outside, the world roared with politics and coin, but inside, it was only breath and pressure and waiting. Valeria moaned as the contractions deepened. "I can't," she gasped at one point, body arching. "You can," Livia replied. "You are The pain built steadily. Valeria's strength was deeper than even she believed. With each wave, she grew bolder, more grounded, as if finally learning to trust the ancient rhythm inside her. She reached for Livia's hand. "Don't leave me. Never." When the time came, Livia guided her to a crouching stool. She positioned cloths beneath, placed a warm compress against her lower back, and whispered every step. "One breath in, one breath out. Push only when the wave crests." A child came into the world just before dusk, a boy, wrapped in a caul, wailing with strength and breath. Livia cleared his lungs gently, pressed him to Valeria's chest, and waited. She did not interrupt the silence. Valeria cried, not from pain, but from astonishment, from relief. "He's here," she whispered. "He's perfect. He is." Servants were summoned quietly. Hot broth was brought, clothes refreshed. The senator himself appeared at the doorway, but did not enter. He looked only once at the child, then nodded once at Livia and turned away. Approval, quiet and precise. Later, as the sky deepened into violet and torches flickered in the halls, a young girl brought Livia a small tray with wine and sweet almonds. A coin rested beneath the cup, heavy, gold, marked with the crest of the house. Livia did not touch it. She sipped the wine slowly, listening to the soft hum of Valeria, humming to her son. When she left the villa just before midnight, the streets were quiet. Rome slept behind her as she stepped into the darkness, the cool air wrapping gently around her. No praise had been spoken, no reward requested, but she carried something heavier than gold trust. A trust that crossed walls of class and silence and echoed down marble halls like a lullaby. She walked home slowly, thinking not of politics or names or coins, but of breath and rhythm, and the way life finds its way, even in places carved. From Stone Dot, it was not the kind of summons Livia welcomed, nor one she could ignore. The messenger came at night, his cloak soaked with rain, face flushed, eyes sunken. "They're ill," he said hoarsely, pressing a folded parchment into her hand. "All of them. And the lady, she's in labor. Early. They've sent for you." "Because there's no one left." Livia didn't wait for more. She lit her lamp, slipped her hands into her satchel, and checked her vials and bundles by touch. Fever. Infection. She could almost smell it in the folds of the message. That metallic, sour scent that clung to rooms where sickness had made its home. She packed carefully bitter herbs, fever salves, charcoal tablets, clean linens, clove oil, and powdered bark that calmed both pain and gut. She added extra clothes, wrapped tight in waxed leather, and a flask of wine-soaked poppy seed for emergencies. The rain had softened to a mist when she left, but the wind cut deep. The road curved east out of Ostia, past old ruins and sleepy mills, past fig groves wrapped in night. It was a long walk to the estate of Gaius Albinus, a minor patrician with land but little voice in the Senate. His villa, she remembered, sat above the marshes where the ground steamed in the mornings. Now, with so much dampness in the air, she wondered how long the sickness had brewed there. Fever traveled easily, in still water and close quarters. She arrived just before dawn. The gates were open. No guards, no sounds, only the whimper of wind between trees and the occasional drip of rainwater from sagging eaves. A boy led her inside, no older than 12, skin pale, eyes rimmed red. "They're in the east wing," he whispered. "Father is too sick to move, Mother. She's been crying for hours." The halls were dim. The air thickens. A sour smell clung to every surface-stale breath. Old sweat, the sweet rotten scent of decay that hadn't finished settling in. Livia covered her mouth with a scarf. The fever had taken hold. She stepped carefully, pressing her feet to the stone without sound, fingers trailing the wall for balance. A servant girl met her near the birthing chamber. She didn't speak, only motioned with a limp hand and disappeared again into the shadows. The room was warm, too warm. Windows shuttered, no air. On the bed, the mother Claudia lay curled to one side, her face wet, hair stuck to her cheeks, eyes glassy with heat. Her hands gripped the edge of the mattress like it was drifting away from her. She moaned low and without rhythm. Her body was shaking. How long? Livia asked the girl nearby, perhaps a cousin. Since yesterday evening, the girl replied. Her waters broke in the night, but she's had no strength. Livia approached, touched Claudia's forehead burning, her hands clammy, her pulse fast, shallow, and erratic. A fever birth. Dangerous. The kind that could burn both mother and child before either took a breath. Livia acted swiftly. She opened the shutters to let air in. She dampened cloths and placed them beneath Claudia's arms, across her chest. She pressed poppy extract to her lips, only a drop to slow the heartbeat. She massaged the belly gently, found the baby's position head down. Low, ready. She's close, Livia said, but weak. I'll need help. The cousin shook her head. We're all sick. Everyone. I can barely stand. Livia took a deep breath. Then we moved slowly, carefully. I will do what I must. She worked. In silence. Dosed Claudia with a fever brew of willow bark and myrtle. Rubbed her legs with clove oil. Whispered into her ear, over and over. You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. The contractions were shallow at first, then deeper but irregular. The fever broke her rhythm, stole her breath. Several times, Claudia drifted into a half-sleep, muttering, eyes unfocused. Livia stayed close, cradling her head, wiping her face, pressing pressure points near her hips. Wake, she whispered. Breathe. Come back. You are the gate. The child needs the gate open. It was nearly noon when the labor intensified. The room stank of sweat and blood and steam. The baby pressed low, and Claudia screamed, not from pain, but from fear. I can't, she gasped. It's too hot, it's burning me. The fever, not the birth, Livia said. Breathe. Through it. Push when the wave crests. Only then. The birth came in pieces, long pauses, quick surges. Livia kept her hands steady, kept her voice low. When the headdress was crowned, she reached in, felt the shoulders. One stuck. She turned the child slightly, whispering as though coaxing it toward the air. Come now. Come now. Don't fight the current. And then the child slipped free, silent, limp, no breath. Livia moved fast, cleared the airways, rubbed the chest, blew softly across the lips. Come on, she whispered. Come on, little one. The fire is over. The storm is past. A whimper, a cough, a cry, high and thin, but a cry. Claudia wept, too weak to lift her arms. Livia laid the child on her chest. A girl, whole, breathing, yours. Claudia stared up at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her hair. Her lips moved, but no sound came. A prayer, maybe. Or just a name. The child's skin was warm, not hot. Her breath was steady. She nursed within minutes, latching as though she'd never doubted the world would welcome her. Livia monitored them, both through the evening. The fever began to drop. Slowly, the cousin brought broth and honey water. The servant boy swept the room clean. By morning, Claudia was sleeping, the child too. Outside, the sky had cleared. Birds sang softly in the trees beyond the villa walls. The air smelled of damp stone and rosemary. Life, faint but present. Livia stepped outside, removed the cloth from her face, and breathed deeply. She would burn her clothing later, wash her skin with vinegar and salt. But for now, she sat on the villa's low wall, watching the light dance on the wet leaves. The house would recover, slowly, but it would live. And so would the girl, born not into celebration, but into survival. A child of steam and silence. A reminder that breath, even fragile breath, is enough to carry the world forward. Livia closed her eyes. The road home would be long, but her steps would be light dot. It was the sort of request that arrived not with parchment or words, but with presence. A quiet knock at dusk. A woman cloaked in deep violet, her face shadowed, her hands folded. She did not speak at first, only held out a token round, polished, carved with the crescent symbol of Diana, goddess of childbirth. Livia recognized it instantly. Few outside the inner sanctum of the temple carried such a token. Fewer still would use it. "You're needed," the woman finally said. Now, Livia did not ask questions. Not out loud. She packed swiftly soft linens, willow bark oil, amber honey, a feather from a dove she'd once found near the baths. Not because she believed in omens, but because the feather had comforted the last woman who labored beneath the moon. She added a carved piece of obsidian she used in ceremonial cuttings, and a vial of night-blooming jasmine oil. This would not be a typical birth. The Temple of Diana sat on the far edge of Ostia, just beyond the oldest aqueducts where moss grew. Thick on stones and trees leaned in like watchers. It was quiet there. Always the kind of quiet that swallowed footsteps. The priestess led her without a word through tall cypress groves, up worn marble steps, and past heavy doors etched with stories of women and stags and stars. Inside, the air was cool and still. Lanterns burned low, their flames soft and golden. Incense lingered, lavender, frankincense, something deeper. Livia followed the woman through winding corridors, lit only by oil bowls mounted on the wall. At last, they stopped at a curtained alcove, woven with vines and lined with soft moss. "She is inside," the priestess whispered. "No name will be spoken." Livia nodded. "Does she know I'm coming?" She asked for a midwife. She did not expect one. The curtain parted, and Livia stepped into a small circular chamber. At the center was a young woman reclining on a bed of woven grass and fur. She was no more than 20, her tunic simple but fine, her hair braided with silver thread. Her eyes were closed, but her breath was steady. A bowl of water rested near her head, and a white deer's antlers lay across her lap. Livia bowed her head in greeting. "I am here to help." The woman opened her eyes, green, wide, ancient. "Despite youth, are you of the temple?" "No," Livia said. "But I have helped many women. I will help you too." "You do not ask who I am?" "That is not my place." "Why do you not fear me?" "Because birth is older than fear." The woman smiled just faintly. "Then you may stay." Her labor had begun only hours before. Light pains, subtle, but steady. She had not screamed, had not panicked, only breathed in silence, her hands folded over her belly. Livia moved gently, checked the pulse, touched the curve of the womb, listened for rhythm. The child was healthy, positioned well. It would be a slow labor, but not a dangerous one. Around them, the temple seemed to pulse softly, breath and silence, incense and flickering flame. Priestesses moved outside the curtain like shadows, never entering, only passing. Livia offered warm water sweetened with honey and crushed dates. She bathed the woman's feet, oiled her temples, and placed the jasmine vial on a small stone near the bed. "I dreamed of this," the woman said softly, "long before I carried this child." "What did you see?" "A woman with no name. A room of moss. the smell of jasmine, a feather at my feet. Livia reached into her satchel and placed the dove feather on the bed beside her. Then perhaps the dream was waiting for you. The woman closed her eyes and smiled again, more deeply now. Outside, the moon was rising, pale and full. The wind rustled gently through the trees. As the hours passed, the contractions deepened. The woman moaned softly, never loud, her voice like a distant bell. Livia massaged her thighs with rosemary oil, whispered words of strength, and caught the sweat from her brow with linen. "You are a gate," she murmured. "The child is the wind. Let the wind pass." The labor stretched long into the night. The woman never asked for help, but never refused it either. She leaned into Livia's hands, held her gaze when the pain was strong. "My body is fire," she whispered once, "but I do not burn." "No," Livia replied. "You are the hearth." The child was crowned just before dawn, slowly, steadily. A girl, dark hair, long fingers, voice strong as thunder when she cried. Livia caught her gently, pressed her to her mother's chest, and let the silence settle around them like cloth. No priestess entered. No announcement was made. Only the sound of breath, two new rhythms now, two lives twined together. "She will never be named," the woman said, "but she will walk with power. Then she will not need a name." They stayed like that for some time, mother and child, Livia kneeling beside them. The first rays of light entered the chamber, soft and gold, brushing the walls like a blessing. When at last Livia rose to clean and pack, the woman touched her arm. "Why do you do this?" "Because life asks." "And if life stops asking?" Livia smiled. "Then I will keep listening." The priestess returned as quietly as she. "Come." The curtain parted just enough. "You may go now," she said. Livia nodded. No thanks were given, none expected. She stepped through the winding halls again, into the soft morning light, where dew clung to the grass and birds called softly from the trees. Her hands still smelled of moss and milk. She walked home slowly, through the waking city, thinking of the nameless child, born not into power, but into purpose, a quiet legacy, a silent strength. In the end, Livia thought, not all births change the world loudly. Some change it in whispers in moss-lined rooms where the sacred and the simple meet, and a feather is as powerful as a crown dot. It began with whispers in the alleyways, fragments of rumor carried on the breath of fishmongers and beggars, through cracked tavern shutters and around cracked amphorae behind the baths. A girl, hiding, young, thin as a reed, with a child. Livia heard it first from Marius the baker, his hands coated in flour, voice lowered so his wife wouldn't scold. Him for gossip. "She's been spotted near the old warehouse by the docks. Looks no older than 15. Scared, belly ready to burst." Livia nodded, said nothing, and kept walking. She'd heard such tales before, often nothing, sometimes everything. But the image clung to her. A girl in the shadows, swollen with life, wrapped in fear. That evening, she walked toward the docks, not with her basket, not as a midwife, just a passerby. She took the quieter streets, the ones slick with fish oil and lined with crates. The warehouse loomed like a forgotten beast long abandoned, its walls streaked with salt, doors creaking in the wind. She waited until full dark before slipping inside. The air was thick with dust and brine. Rats scattered. A gull cried from somewhere above. At first, she saw nothing, but then a movement, a breath, a shape curled between two crates, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The girl, barely more than a child, hair matted, eyes wide with hunger and exhaustion. Her belly rose like a tide beneath the cloth, round and strained. She flinched when Livia stepped closer. "I'm not here to harm you," Livia whispered. "You're in labor." The girl didn't speak. She only stared, lips parted, one hand clutched to her side. Her breathing was fast. "Shallow. How long have you been here?" Livia asked. Still no answer. "Does anyone know you're here?" A pause, then the slightest shake of the head. Livia crouched slowly, hands out in the open. "My name is Livia. I help women. I help babies. Let me help you." The girl blinked rapidly. Then, at last, a hoarse whisper. "They'll find me." "Who?" "The house." I ran. Livia's breath caught. A runaway, pregnant. If the wrong person found her, she scanned the warehouse. There was no time to move her far. The child would come soon. "We'll stay here," Livia said. "I've delivered children in worse places." She unpacked quickly clean clothes, warmed water from a nearby bucket, a flask of oil she always kept at her hip. The girl winced as another contraction tore through her. She gasped, bent forward. "It hurts." "Yes, but you are strong." "I don't feel strong. That's how I know you are." Livia wiped her brow, examined her quietly. The baby was low. The labor was already well underway. There would be no stopping it now. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, it was all breath and shadows. The girl cried out softly. Livia hushed her not to silence her, but to guide her. "Breathe low. Keep it quiet. Just you and me here." The labor was fast, sharp. The girl gripped the edge of the crate like it was an anchor. Her legs trembled. Her voice cracked. I can't. You are. You already are." The baby crowed quickly, and Livia guided it free with practiced hands. A boy, tiny, wet with birth, silent. She rubbed his back, cleared his nose, whispered words passed down from elder midwives, long since gone. He sputtered, cried. Livia smiled. The girl wept. "He's alive?" "He is. You both are." She placed the baby on the girl's chest, covered them both with her cloak. The child latched instinctively. A small miracle in a forgotten corner of the city, but danger still hovered. "They'll take him," the girl whispered, eyes wild. Again, "They'll come. If they find me," Livia placed a hand gently on her arm, "then we will not let them. But I'm nothing. A slave. I don't even have a name." Livia's voice was soft but steady. "You have breath. You have blood. You have him. That's enough." She stayed with them through the night, feeding, washing, holding. When dawn crept through the cracks in the roof, Livia made a choice. She wrapped the baby tightly, nestled him close to the girl, and helped her to her feet. "I know a place. Quiet, safe. A woman who helps those the city forgets." They moved slowly through the alleys, avoiding the main roads. Livia's cloak hid the girl well, and the baby made no sound. The woman she spoke of lived near the edge of the city, a widow with a soft heart and no ties to the law. She took them in without question. A bowl of porridge, a clean bed, a whispered promise. Livia left only when the girl had fallen asleep. Her son curled beneath her chin like a bird beneath a wing. She did not give the girl's name. She did not even ask for it. Some stories are not meant to be told out loud. That afternoon, she returned to the market. No one asked where she'd been. The sun rose. The fish sellers shouted. The world moved on. But in a quiet house near the edge of the city, a girl with no name became a mother, and a baby born in the shadows breathed beneath the light of morning. Livia knew the law would not have spared them, but she was not the law. She was a midwife, a guardian of breath, and sometimes mercy was louder than order. The morning came gently, the sky brushed. With pale rose and silver, the air cool but sweet. Livia stirred before the light fully arrived, as she always did, but today there was no urgency in her limbs. No satchel to pack. No message slipped beneath her door. No mother in labor waiting on the edge of breath. Just silence. The familiar. Silence of her small house, where shadows curled softly around clay jars, and the last embers of the hearth whispered beneath the ash. She sat up slowly, her joints a little stiffer than yesterday, though she would never say so aloud. Her hands still worked, her eyes still sharp, her voice still steady. But the years had wrapped themselves around her quietly, like ivy around an old column. Not with weight, but with permanence. She moved to the window and opened the shutters. Outside, Ostia yawned into wakefulness. The baker's boy swept the step. The fishmonger's daughter carried lemons in her apron. A pair of doves cooed from the rooftop opposite, their wings fluttering in rhythm. And somewhere far off, the sea whispered as it always did. She breathed in deeply, let the salt and bread and lavender fill her lungs. It was a good morning to end on. She had made her decision the night before. No announcement, no fanfare. Only a quiet closing of the jar that held her calendula balm, and a note tucked inside her medicine basket for the next hands. The basket now sat near the hearth, beside a pair of sandals and a robe that no longer held the scent of rosemary. Livia dressed slowly, not in the tunic she wore to births, but in her first, old, simple linen the color of faded sun. She combed her hair into a single braid, the way her mother once had. Then she sat with thyme, fennel, and anise and let herself drift. Memory, like water, moved gently through her. Not a flood, just ripples. She remembered the first child she ever delivered. The way the mother had screamed like thunder, then wept like rain. Livia had been barely older than the mother herself, hands shaking, breath caught. But when the child cried, something had opened inside her, not pride, not relief, purpose. She remembered the high berth in the senator's home, the one where marble walls and golden bowls could not soften the mother's terror. She remembered the slave girl who gave birth beneath crates by the docks, and the child born in the temple's moss-lit chamber, unnamed but radiant. She remembered domus, the one who had lost, then found her breath again. She remembered babies who lived, some who did not. She remembered laughter, and tea shared after long nights, and the feel of warm, slick skin in her palms as a new life opened its lungs for the first time. But more than anything, she remembered the hands. So many hands gripping hers, reaching for comfort, for hope, for strength. Young hands, old hands, bloody hands, trembling hands, and each time she held them. Not because she was a savior, but because that's what a midwife does. She holds what others cannot. She carries breath until it is strong enough to carry itself. A knock came at the door. Gentle, familiar. Livia stood slowly, her knees cracking like branches. When she opened the door, a girl stood there, no older than 20, with bright eyes and a satchel clutched tightly in both hands. "Are you Livia?" "I am. They told me you might teach me. If I'm quiet, if I watch closely, if I care enough." Livia studied her for a moment. The girl had that look curious, tired, open. She had already seen something of life's mésalliances, but not enough to make her bitter. A good start. Livia stepped aside. "Come in. The water's still warm." The girl entered quietly. She didn't ask many questions. She sat where Livia pointed, watched as the older woman opened jars, named herbs, and described the feel of a baby's head before the final push. Livia did not speak as much as she used to. Words weren't always necessary. Sometimes the body remembers better without explanation. They brewed tea together, sorted clothes, rebound old scrolls of healing texts. At midday, the girl asked, "Why did you do this for so long?" Livia thought for a while. "Because I could. And because others couldn't. And because each time someone handed me their fear, I wanted to hand them back something braver." The girl nodded, understanding not all of it, but enough. The sun crept across the floor. Light slid through the doorway like an old friend. In the afternoon, Livia showed her how to mix a pain-soothing salve, how to calm a fever, how to recognize a child turned wrong inside the womb. "It's not always miracles," Livia said. "It's more often a mess. But inside the mess, there's something sacred. You'll see it, if you're still. If you wait," the girl nodded again. "And if I'm afraid, then you're ready." When the shadows lengthened, the girl stood. "May I come again tomorrow? If the city allows it." The girl smiled and left, the satchel now heavier with herbs and hope. Livia sat once more by the window. The light had turned golden. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried. Not from pain, just from being alive. She closed her eyes and listened. She did not need to answer every call anymore. The city had new hands now. She had done enough. Tomorrow she would rise again, maybe tend to her herbs, maybe walk by the sea, maybe nothing. But today she had passed on the flame. A quiet legacy, not written on tablets or carved into stone, but carried in touch, in breath, in the silent knowing passed between two women by lamplight. Her final delivery had not been of a child, but of a calling. And as the sky deepened into dusk, and the stars blinked open one by one, Livia smiled softly to herself. Not every story ends with a cry. Some end with a sigh. A breath was released. A life exhaled, not gone, but given, but given.